Hello and welcome to yet another video. This is the first episode of the story where Madara devised a plan. The Yondaime ruined things. Madara devised another plan. One that could never fail. But even the best laid plans of mice and men can go awry, and this one had just run into Konoha's most surprising ninja, Uzumaki Naruto. This story is from Arun 2110. Please support him, her. Please like and subscribe to show your support. Let's get the show started. It was morning twilight when a gaunt and tired-looking Itachi crossed the border of Aim. He made inquiries at the first house he ran into and then followed instructions to the nearest village. He ordered a hearty breakfast at the village inn and waited. One of Pain's avatars found him at 11:45. The villagers flocked to their god to lay their hands on him and to greet him, and Pain bore their veneration with good humor for a little while before he excused himself, begging more pressing duties and desiring privacy. Thus, when Pain settled down before Itachi, the inn was empty with the owner and his two serving hands guarding the entrance and exit. "Where is Kisame? I did not sense him with you," Pain asked without preamble. "Dead, I think," Itachi responded. Pain stared for a moment. "How? What happened?" "Disease. Don't know what it was. He fell ill and then I did. This was about 3 weeks back, I think. I'm not sure. What day is it?" Pain told him. 3 weeks back then." Itachi went into paroxysm of coughs. "Go on," Pain said when the Uchiha recovered. "It hit us both very bad, but Kisame was worse off. I don't know why. Nothing ever got to him and I was always the sick one of us both. But by the end of the first day, he was delirious. I tended to him for 2 days before I fell sick as well." Itachi paused to gulp down some water. "I don't remember what happened afterwards. I regained my senses 6 days back in the evening. Kisame wasn't in the camp. I waited 3 days for him, while I got my feet under me again, but he did not return. He'd left his sword behind, as well as his other stuff, but he didn't come back. Why didn't you report in earlier?" Itachi held up his left hand to show an empty ring finger. "I don't know what happened to my ring. I couldn't find it in the campsite. It could be lying around there still, I suppose. I was too weak to do a proper search, you see." Pain sighed. "I suppose you left Kisame's sword behind as well." Itachi nodded. "When everything else is so screwed up, why should this be any better?" Pain muttered to himself. "Fine. Can you make it to the capital on your own?" Itachi looked unsure. "All right. This is what we'll do. You'll secure transportation from this village and make your way to the capital. It shouldn't be another 2 or 3 days before you get there. I expect you to be bedridden for another couple of weeks afterwards. But that's as it will be. In the meanwhile, I'll send Zetsu out to hunt for Kisame, and recover his sword as well hunt for your ring. Hopefully, we'll get it back." "Yes, Pain-sama. I expect you to report for debriefing the morning after you check in." "Yes, Pain-sama. See you in the capital, Itachi. Thanks for seeing me at such short notice, Hokage-sama. Your report convinced me of the urgency of the situation, Inoichi. Do you wish refreshments?" Inoichi nodded once. "Yes, a little sake, if you'd please." Kakashi signaled his ANBU and one of them served the intelligence specialist his drink. Inoichi took a little sip of the warm liquor and let out a sigh of satisfaction. "Excellent as always," he said. "So, how are my students?" Kakashi asked. "They were fine when I left, Hokage-sama. They told me they'll be reporting here to you within the next couple of days." Kakashi smiled at that very positive report. "Naruto's fine?" "He's still not his usual self, but he's much better than he was before." "Good. Good. And Jiraiya's command? How does it?" Their morale's very high and they were raring to have a go at the IWA Jinchurikis. They're set to go on the offensive and spread mayhem behind enemy lines as soon as we give them the word. Excellent. And how is Cabbage? Cabbage was Itachi's codename in ANBU before the Uchiha massacre. Itachi himself had chosen the name because his favorite food was cabbage and onigiri with seaweed. He left for AIM 3 days back. Do you think he'll be able to convince Akatsuki with his story? Kakashi asked. Inoichi shrugged. If anyone can do it, he can. He is still as great a prodigy as when he left Konoha. Still, I would like to hear your thoughts on the subject. Well, we practically spent the last couple of weeks getting him ready for his infiltration assignment. Your girl Sakura was especially helpful in that regard with her medical skills. First, she eradicated his tuberculosis and then cured most of the major damage to his lungs. There is still some scarring there, she reports, but he should have better than 90% of his lung capacity available to him now, which is leagues ahead of what he had before. Additionally, she has supplied him with medicine to increase his lung efficiency at capturing oxygen by about 8% for use when it is time. How would that affect his combat readiness? Kakashi asked. Given his age, his skills, and the fact that he was an absolute monster in battle before Sakura healed him, I'd say he'd be lay waste to whomsoever opposed him on the field. Excellent. What else? We spent a week decorating the campsite to Itachi's satisfaction. Anyone Akatsuki sends to investigate his story should be convinced of it because we went through a lot of trouble getting the look and feel just right. A bit of a taskmaster, is he? Kakashi grunted a chuckle. Yes, so I'm told. But in the end, even Itachi was satisfied and then Sakura started on him again. This time, to infect him with one of Kabuto's and Tsunade's house specials, K1S1. The Hokage grimaced. This he had not expected as there had been no mention of it in the report. He knew of this particular family of engineered virus, though he could not recollect what this particular strain did. Still, what he could recall off the top of his head was bad enough. This was another secret that had better never see the light of day or there'd be hell to pay. I did not authorize the release of weaponized virus into the wild. And I'll have the head of whoever did it. What on earth was Sakura thinking, and was Itachi out of his mind to volunteer as a carrier? Kakashi barked, his voice a little shrill. To his guards, he said, get Tsunade and Kabuto from their labs. I want to talk to them. Inoichi looked like a deer caught in headlights. Maybe we'd better wait until Tsunade and Kabuto are here for a detailed report, Kakashi replied, calmer than before. Yes, Hokage-sama. You can skip this part and continue on with the rest of your report. Once Itachi was infected, he waited until the initial symptoms developed and then set off by himself to the AIM border. He said that he would make contact with the Akatsuki leadership from there, and I came here. Wasn't he concerned that he'd sent both his ring and Kisame's to us? Every report I'd read on the subject was emphatic about the importance the Akatsuki members placed on their rings. He wasn't. Said he'd blame his illness for losing it. He said that once he was back at his camp, he was going to use his Tsukuyomi on himself to convince his mind that was what really happened. All right. Kakashi paused at the sight of an ANBU materializing out of the wood. Yes, Captain. Tsunade-sama and Kabuto-sama are here to answer your summons, Hokage-sama, the ANBU officer replied. Send them in. The ANBU nodded and melted into the wood again. A few seconds later, the office door opened and the two researchers were chaperoned in. Good afternoon, Kabuto, Tsunade. A pleasant day, isn't it? The heads of Konoha's research and medicine wings shot questioning glances at each other. Yes, it is, Hokage-sama, Tsunade volunteered. Well, it damn well is not. I mean, it was a pleasant day until 10 minutes back, but it is no more. You know why? Because Inoichi here tells me you gave one of my children a bioengineered weapon for use in AIM. Imagine my surprise on hearing that particular factoid, as I don't remember authorizing such an use. So, no, it is not a pleasant day for me, and if I don't get a good enough answer from either of you soon, yours will turn out a whole lot worse. I don't remember sending any bioweapon to Sakura, Tsunade answered. Neither do I, Kabuto concurred. Well, somebody better confess before I lose my patience, Kakashi threatened. The hell? Inoichi, what did you tell him? Kabuto asked. That Sakura shot Itachi with K1S1 before he left for AIM. Tsunade sputtered. Kabuto shook his head. You idiot, the two of said simultaneously. Then, as Kabuto waved her on, Tsunade spoke. You colossal twit. Are you going senile in your old age? Enough, Kakashi barked. What the hell is going on? You'd better have a good reason or you will keep a civil tongue in my office while addressing my other commanders, Tsunade. Tsunade shot a venomous glare at Inoichi and Kakashi. He reported wrong. And if you'd read the reports we send you, you'd know the K1S1 is not a bioweapon. It is an attenuated vaccine for one of the viruses in our labs. While the immunity is developing, the subject has a high fever and their lymph nodes swell. Other symptoms may include dysentery and general muscular weakness. Since the virus has never been used in the wild and the mission parameter required the subject simulate an unknown pathogen, we decided to use it. Tsunade's glared even more. Next time, get someone with brains to serve as your eyes and ears on the field, and while you're at it, better start using that useless pile of fat between your ears yourself. Kakashi smiled a fake smile. If he'd read the situation so badly, then the fault lay entirely at his feet. Perhaps the stress of war was getting to him as well. Are we excused? Kabuto asked. Yes, you are. Once Anbu ushered the two out, Kakashi turned to the Yamanaka and shook his head. Well, that was one embarrassment I could have done without. Black Zetsu was miffed. I hate it when this happens, he said to White Zetsu. Like I don't know, White Zetsu retorted. The two of them had followed Pain's instructions and scoured Itachi's and Kisame's area of operations until they'd identified their campsite. But there was a problem. He wasn't the first person to find it. And going by the smells of the site, he wasn't even the 10th person. What do we do? Black Zetsu asked. We'll have to track, White Zetsu said, whomsoever destroyed the camp. And find where they took the Samahata, Black Zetsu completed the thought. But first, White Zetsu started and his black half continued, we need to find the ring. They shot one long gaze around the campsite. Too bad the site is so ruined, White Zetsu said in a suffering voice that was picked up by his counterpart, we'll never be able to tell what happened here. 15 kilometers from Itachi's camp. The Kusa Jounin who commanded the platoon that had discovered Itachi's carefully prepared campsite glared at the idiot subordinate who'd thought it was a nice idea to loot the weird sword. You incompetent cretin, he scolded, what on earth were you thinking when you unwrapped that sword? The subject of the Jounin's ire, a chunin of 2 summers, moaned in pain. The sword had eat so much chakra in the bare second it had been in contact with his skin that he was lucky to be alive. Not that the luck would last much longer if they did not manage to staunch the bleeding from the severed artery in his hand, which was the other gift of the sword. Colonel, our scouts report IWA troops advancing towards us, Seigo Takamori's aide-de-camp reported on awaking his superior. Strength and disposition? About 7 kilometers due north and estimate a reinforced battalion of samurai and shinobi. I guess they've gotten enough of their feet underneath them that they're comfortable testing the waters. Is Shinsuke awake? Yes, Colonel. He was in the command post when a runner brought the report. Very well. Tell him to prepare our forces for march in an hour. Send the scouts and the screening forces ahead. I'll complete my morning ablutions and join the team in the command post. What's the plan now? Madara asked. Pain threw up his hands in disgust. I don't know. Send Sasori and Deidara into grass. Don't think we have much of a choice there. Yeah, me too. Do you believe Itachi? I sensed no hesitation from him when he answered my questions. He is a shinobi and a prodigy at that. I'm aware, thank you, Pain spat, which is why I've sent Zetsu to confirm his story and to hunt for Kisame. Good. Because this stinks some to me. And I don't want us to blindly trust Itachi. Pain raised an eyebrow. You brought him into the organization. Nevertheless, I have my concerns. I don't think he'll willingly subject himself to a mind search if I were to do it, but perhaps he'll submit to you. Perhaps. We'll do it during his debriefing. Sandaime Tsuchika Jinoki stretched and clutched his old hips in pain, grunting at the sensation of a red-hot nail shoved into his flesh and bones. Tsuchika-jesima, are you all right? Anoki's Chunin aide asked. Of course, I'm not all right, you fool, the Sandaime replied. Oh, my aching back. Maybe you should do the reports later? I'd rather get it over this now, the oldster replied, grunting at another spike of pain as he moved his abused back once again. Now, where is that next report? Here, Tsuchika-jesima. The Sandaime mumbled as the Chunin unfurled the scroll and laid before him. Shine some more light. I can't see very well. Yes, Tsuchika-jesima. So, our logistics situation has improved much in the front line, And we plan to test the enemy's defenses for a week or so along very axes to judge their combat readiness. Everything's on schedule and we're ready to commence large-scale operations in another week. Temu was a broken man. And it shone on his face. Not only had the vast majority of samurai who weren't sworn to his clan refused to support him, but as their representatives had made abundantly clear, they wholeheartedly supported the Godame Hokage's position. Worse still, they'd showed up at his door accompanied by Hatake Kakashi's ninjas as a calculated insult. They'd then laid the law to him, the step-brother of the late daimyo and the rightful ruler of Hai no Kuni, and forced him to surrender his household troops as well as his wife and kids. The leaders of the household troops had been stripped off their titles and holdings, and the common soldiery split into small groups and assigned to garrison duty in the capital under the watchful eye of the Leaf Nin. It is just too big of a humiliation, Lord, the elderly samurai who commanded the visitors spoke kindly once the palace had emptied of Temu's family, soldiers, servants and hangers-on. And too big a loss of face. On his knees, Temu glared at the samurai as he waited for the ink on the rice paper he'd written his jisei, the death poem, to dry. The only bright side to the whole affair was that he'd been informed that the other claimants were meeting or about to meet the same fate themselves. It is for the best, Lord, for the nation, the samurai said aloud. Temu spat at the samurai's feet. He was only going through with the seppuku for fear of what the shinobi would do to his wife and children. The samurai chucked. It's getting late and I have better places to be. Can we get on with it? Casting one last glare in the oldster's direction, Temu opened his kimono and reached for the ornate tanto prepared for the ritual. His fingers had barely touched the cloth wrapped around the blade when his kaishakunin's blade swung down, neatly cutting his neck but for a thin strip of skin so that the witnesses wouldn't be subjected to the sight of a rolling head. It was, as such things went, as good a seppuku as could be had under the circumstances, and everyone agreed that honor was satisfied. Now, that's a sight for sore eyes and brightens up my day considerably, Lieutenant Colonel Beppu Shinsuke said jovially, sheathing his sword. He waved to the retreating enemy and shouted at them. Put up a better fight next time, assholes, because this sure ain't it. Having fun, are we? Colonel Seigo Takamori asked. Verily so, Shinsuke agreed. It feels good to beat their ass finally, even if this was merely a reconnaissance in force. Yes. Now we'd better get back and prepare. Because if they're starting to probe again after so many days of peace and quiet, it means the hammer's going to fall somewhere. Shinsuke smiled predatorily. Let them come. Let them come. What have we here? Sakura asked as she plopped next to Naruto. Naruto shot his teammate a smile and went back to plucking the leaves off the grass. Morning to you as well, Sakura. The kunoichi gave her friend a brief hug, which was returned, and ran her hand through his hair. You need a haircut, buddy. Yes, mistress. What are you staring at? Nothing. Then what's on your mind? You're not going to go until I tell you what's on my mind, are you? Naruto asked, shooting his friend a look. Sakura pulled at his ears playfully. You're so smart. How did you guess? Smart ass. So, once again, what's on your mind? I'm thinking. About what? About Itachi. Oh. I was thinking that if anyone's going to make decisions about sending me to my death or sending me to end someone else, I want that person to be like Itachi. Why? Because I had this conversation with Shikamaru before we left for Kusa, and he said that everything is so screwed up because everyone cares about what happens to them and no one thinks about what's good for all people everywhere. Well, of course, they aren't going to think about people they've never met or talked to before, Naruto. Why should they? I agree with you, Sakura. I don't care about what happens to some far-off dude in the ass end of nowhere, but I think caring for yourself or your family alone is also wrong. Draw the line at the clan? Sakura pondered aloud, then shook her head. No, that doesn't work. Look where all those clans who refused to lend or receive assistance from others back when the villages were being formed ended up. Naruto nodded. So maybe the clan isn't where you should draw the line. What about the village? Sakura asked. But a village is too small to defend itself. Just as a clan is. The hidden villages, for all our power, survive only because we have the resources of the nation to draw on. Because we depend on the nation for food, metal, clients, strategic depth, and so much more. Naruto nodded emphatically. Exactly. They depend on us to protect them, and we depend on them because without them, we'd end up where Suna is today. So, loyalty to the nation-state is the ultimate answer. Loyalty over clan, village, and family. Yes, it's okay to be loyal to all those things, but we can't put their needs ahead that of the nation, for we all end up being the losers in the end. But the current status quo was established by the Yondaime, and obviously it hasn't provided the answer to the question of peace and prosperity. I mean, there is still so much pain and suffering going around. Yes, it is. Shikamaru said it's because power is concentrated in the hands of a few because of bloodlines and chakra. And we're ever so willing to sell ourselves to the highest bidder. And not the saint. If you want to put it in those terms, yes. We don't work for saints. Good thing, because we'd all go hungry if we did. But would your saint be willing to order someone who deserved to be put down like a loathsome beast? Because there are plenty of animals in the world and we ninja cull their ranks. Not always, and even when we do, we don't do it for the common good, but we do cull them. Yes, and that brings us back to where we started. In this imperfect world, with all its evils and pains and joys and sorrows and love and hate, I'd rather follow someone like Itachi than the bunch of vermin who lord it over the rest of High no Kuni from the capital. Because though he may not fit the dictionary definition of a saint, and though he has made plenty of mistakes, he's done so much for the common good. Even now, after all the pain that Leaf has inflicted on him, he goes to throw away his life once again so that we may all be better off. Ah. I understand now. You want our leaders to be such selfless characters. Yes. Selflessness. And only selflessness. I'm okay with them being dumb shits. Really? Well, not if there's one prince and he's a selfless, dumb shit. But I mean a bunch of them working together for the betterment of the people. Like the council we have advising the Hokage. In that case, they needn't all be dumb shits. Bordering on treasonous talk there, I see, Sakura chided playfully. Is it treason to want good leaders? Naruto asked. Sakura shook at him. Man, you really are sold on this idea, aren't you? Yes, I am. I've been thinking about this on and off for weeks now while we'd been stuck here, and Itachi's selfless act helped gel my thoughts. Sakura nodded. Okay, wise guy. Let's continue with our conversation since your heart is so set on it. You want selfless ninja saints for our leaders. They can be selfless samurai saints, too. Or from any walk of life for that matter. How do you select them? From jobs that obviously place them at personal risk but serve the common interests of the people. Professions like shinobi, samurai, you mean? Yes. But we're born to it, Naruto. And though the samurai like to pose as if they do it for the honor, they're whores for money and power all the same. Naruto nodded. Which is the problem? For every Itachi who does it for a selfless reason, there are a dozen assholes who do it for the money, the rush or the joy of killing. And them's not the ones we want anywhere near the seats of power, Sakura said, echoing Naruto's thoughts. Precisely. And that is where I'm stuck at present, the blonde conceded. Too bad, because I think you're onto something there. Naruto smiled and rose to his feet. I hear the call for breakfast. We can go find Sasuke and have breakfast, just the three of us, he said, extending his hand to his friend. You mean, like old times? She asked. Like always, he replied with a grin. Raikage-sama, the report from the negotiations with the Leaf representative has been on your desk for a week. I think the daimyo would like to have your input before the end of the year. The Raikage glared at his aide. He was going to teach the uppity bugger a lesson one of these days. I'd already had a look at it. What of it? The daimyo wants your input. About how we should proceed? As if that's not the easiest thing in the world. We wait and see which way the wind blows when the campaign resumes on the Earthfire front. If fire wins, we negotiate reasonable terms, else we claim rice. I'll send that as your response. Yes. You do that. Itachi breathed a sigh of relief as he lay down on his bed. It had been far too long, and the stress of infiltrating Akatsuki all over again was too big a pain. He was glad that his part in the act was over. Now, all he had to do was wait and see if they bought his story, which would be the best possible outcome. And if they did not? Well, he was in Pain's abode now, the nerve center of Akatsuki, and if wanted to get him, let him. He'd make them pay a steep price for his blood. Did his story check out? Pain asked Zetsu without preamble. Well, the campsite was trashed by some Kusanin, but his sickness isn't faked and his blood work shows a profusion of an unidentified antigen. So it checks out. As much of it as can be verified, Black Zetsu responded. Keep an eye on him for the next couple of weeks. If he makes a false move, I'll report everything to you. Dismissed, Zetsu. Under the cloudy night sky, Jounin Shiranui Genma worried his back teeth with a senbon as he awaited the return of the lone summon from its mission. He and his team were operating close to the main Earth and Grass Army camp across the river, Ishikarigawa, from 3rd Restoration Brigade. Their mission was to poison the 2 wells and the main water tank used by the enemy. The intent was to provoke a confrontation with the Fire Army silently crossing the river at that very moment. The guiding thought, which Genma thought was a far stretch, was that if the enemy did not have a secure water supply for a long march, their commander might be tempted to stand his ground and fight out a battle in a place and time of the Colonel Seigo Takamori, the commander of the 3rd Restoration Brigade choosing. The mission required steadiness and nerves of steel, which description fit Genma to a T. Gunma. Yes, Rado. The loaned summon is back. It says that it has completed its mission. Poisoned both the wells and the main sump? Not the main sump, Konoha Junin, but the other two, the Mao summon replied. Your mission included the main sump as well, Gunma pointed out. It is my considered opinion that poisoning the sump while evading detection is a fool's errand. I can't take that back to my superiors, Gunma responded, the littlest of frowns marring his visage. I have to know whether you made the attempt. The mouse sighed in exasperation and shook its head. Humans could be stubborn about the stupidest things. Of course, I tried. And if I'd been half the mouse I am, I'd be main course on some Iwa Chunin's breakfast menu tomorrow morning. We done yet? Because if we are, I'd like to strike home. I can smell rat snakes nearby and this forest gives me the creeps. Thank you for your service and fare thee well, dear mouse. I hate these risky jobs, the mouse grumbled before vanishing. And I don't know why I risk my life and limb for Yunin Gen. Gunma turned to his team. Some summons were grouchy that way and there wasn't a thing one could do about it. Gently, lads. Let's get to the rendezvous. XXXX Colonel Seigo Takamori awaited his aide's return patiently at the mobile command post. The latter returned before long from his errand. Colonel, the Shinobi scouts have crossed the river and anchored the cables on the opposite bank. They're establishing a secure perimeter for our engineers to work on. How long until the suspension bridge is ready? Half an hour. Give or take 10 minutes. Good. Order of crossing is the 43rd, 190th, 31st, 32nd and 44th. I'll be crossing over with the first wave. Lieutenant Colonel Beppu Shinsuke to remain behind and organize the crossing on this end. Yes, sir. XXXX By morning twilight, the temporary bridge was complete and the overstrength regiment was across the river. The engineers' work weren't done with the bridge by a long shot, however. As good as the bridge was, if shit hit the fan, the 3rd Restoration Brigade were going to need something that would allow more men to cross at once. So, the engineers were currently busy at work expanding it. Still, for all that could go wrong yet, it was clear Lady Fortune smiled upon the operation. There had been one casualty so far and even that hadn't been a fatality. One of the pikemen had slipped on the bridge and his pike had severed the right arm of the man before him. There was a moment of scare when the injured man screamed holy murder, but with the perimeter extended almost a mile out, the Enterprise hadn't been in any real danger. We're 3 hours behind schedule, but that's the last of the lot, Shinsuke reported to his commanding officer, but for a couple of squads of shinobi and engineers on the opposite side. Good job, Lieutenant Colonel. Then if you don't need me, I'd like to join my men. That's probably for the best. Dismissed. XXXX Brigadier Canon Kodahito was starting his morning ablutions and getting ready for the daily morning status meeting when his aide interrupted him with a scout troop leader and his commander. Sir, the aide said, our poison testers say that the 2 wells supplying water to the camp are poisoned. The brigadier grimaced. This was the 2nd time in the last month that the wells had been poisoned. It would be a day or 2 before the water was purified, but until then, it was back to tight water rationing, sweaty bodies, and sweatier and stinkier armpits. Further, the scouts have something to say that I think you should hear. Sure, Kodahito nodded, at ease. What is it you and the corporal want to tell me, Sergeant? Sergeant nodded at the corporal. Go on, Shinji. Tell the brigadier what you told me. The corporal went to parade rest and stood a bit straighter. Sir, I was leading a patrol this morning near that copse of trees about 2 miles southeast when I saw a marching body of troops under enemy colors. On this side of the river? Kodahito asked to ascertain. That's right, sir. Numbers? They were in 2 columns. I did a rough estimation and arrived at 3,000. They must have crossed over during the night, the brigadier muttered to himself. He motioned the corporal to silence and gestured at his aide to come closer. "Send messengers to the regimental commanders with my compliments. I want them and their staffs to assemble in the command post for a meeting post-haste. I want the Shinobi CO and his XO to attend as well." To the corporal and sergeant, he said, "Thank you, Corporal. You just might have saved all our lives. And thank you, Sergeant, for having the presence of mind to not waste time going through the chain of command with this. Now, if you'll stand by my side, we'll see what we'll see." XXXX. It took a few minutes for the command staff to assemble at the brigadier's tent. By the time they arrived, Konoha had formed an initial plan of action. It was imperative that he projected decisiveness and control to maintain his subordinates' morale. "Everyone in?" Konoha addressed the assembled officers. "I'd appreciate it if the commanding officers would sound off by regiment." The COs called present. "Good. I gathered you folks here because it appears we have an emergency on our hands. Seigo Takamori has crossed the river with his regiment sometime during the night. We estimate they'll fall upon us in another 4 hours. How did that happen? Why didn't the shinobi patrolling the river spot the crossing?" someone gasped out, their voice full of panic. "It doesn't matter for the nonce how the shinobi missed them. Investigation as to the cause can wait. What matters now is that the enemy has crossed the river and how we're going to respond to their action," Konoha harshly responded. Earth could win the day, but not if he allowed panic to spread through his ranks. Fire had surprise on their side and throw panic into the mix, and that would be all she wrote for his combined command. There were several calls of assent to Konoha and the panicked voice fell silent. "Good. We'll meet the enemy on the plain between the river and the camp with our right flank anchored by the Boso Hills. A company from the Shinobi Battalion will secure the hills. The remaining 2 companies from the battalion can guard the other flank and act as a strike force. The 1st Regiment will hold the center, and the 3rd and 7th on the right and left flanks. Any questions, so far?" There were none. In fact, the commanders were already scribbling movement orders on their scrolls. "Send the order to your men to break camp and to prepare for a forced march. We'll march out in an hour." XXXX. "Colonel, the scouts report that the enemy camp is abuzz with movement. It appears they are wise to us." Takamori chewed on his rations and nodded. "Have the columns spread out a bit more. We don't want them choking in each other's dust." XXXX. Konoha looked askance at the shinobi commander. The worthy knelt before him, worry writ on his face. "I'm not sure I got you the first time. My patrol say they reported the crossing, but they received orders from the HQ to hold position and to observe. They're trailing the enemy as we speak. I assure you, Colonel Takahashi, that neither I nor my staff sent out any such communique." "I know, sir," which leads to the conclusion that our communication lines have been compromised. Or a spy ring has penetrated us so completely that they can act without impunity and we're none the wiser. The colonel cleared his throat. By highlighting the possibility of a compromised communication line, he'd hoped to gloss over the other possibility and avoid further loss of face. "Yes, sir. We'd accounted for that. For now, we've secured the intel and communications groups and are getting the information directly from the scouts. At this point, if we had more time, we could vet them ourselves, but right now, we do not have the luxury of time, and whatever we do will not impact the outcome of the approaching battle. I've sent word to the rear for counterintelligence specialists to handle their processing. They should be here in another day or 2. The fact that the penetration happened under your watch is a black mark on your record, but that you acted so decisively once it was exposed shows the lapse was merely one of failure of oversight and not something else. I'll inform my superiors so once the battle is done." "Very well, Colonel, you're excused." XXXX. The 2 armies were arrayed against each other on the field by 1,000 hours. It was a bright, sunny morning with a healthy breeze from the south. Temperature was in the low 70s and there were spots of cloud in the sky. The Fire Army was made of 3rd Restoration Brigade under Col Seigo Takamori and attachments. It was 6,100 strong with 5,300 infantry, 300 shinobi, and 500 catapultiers. The shinobi were the 49th Shinobi Battalion, under the command of Major Shiranui Genma, Jounin in the Hidden Leaf. The artillery were the 190th Artillery Battalion. The infantrymen were civilian volunteers with a core leadership of samurai. Individually, they weren't as skilled as a samurai with a sword or a shinobi with chakra, but armed with numerous augmentations from recent advances in seals, they could handle their own for a while. In a battle against chakra monsters or skilled operators, they'd be vulnerable, but training samurai or shinobi to that level took a decade or more, whereas their augmentations had boosted the infantrymen to their proficiency in less than a year. About 500 of Colonel Takamori's infantry were fresh reinforcements from the rear who were augmented with seals that combined even more advanced versions of blessed seals of power with printed seals and rushed through training for operations on the IWA front. These were shock troops and Takamori had attached them to the 1,000-strong 31st Battalion on the Fire's left flank. The entirety of Leaf Shinobi Complement defended this battalion against Earth and Grass Nin who were operating on the Boso Hills. Further, a battery of 10 heavy and 7 light catapults supported the 31st Battalion. The left flank, the shinobi and artillery complements included, was under the command of Lieutenant Colonel Beppu Shinsuke. 32nd Battalion held the center of the fire line. The 32nd was over strength by 400 with 1,400 infantry. Major Hiro Onoda commanded it. 12 heavy and 20 light catapults had enfilade on the 32nd, though their primary mission was to support the 43rd and 44th Battalions. 43rd and 44th Battalions with no shinobi attachments, but 4 heavy and 25 light catapults held the right flank. The 43rd was 1,100 strong and the 44th was 1,300 strong. They were under the command of Major Korechika Anami. Before he was an infantry officer, Anami had been a Leaf Jounin. He'd hung his kunai to join the 3rd Restoration Brigade when the unit was initially formed. Takamori put him in charge of the right flank and given him control of most of the fast-loading and fast-firing light artillery because that was where he expected the heaviest blows from the Earth and Grass Shinobi to fall. The Earth and Grass Army was commanded by Brigadier Canon Kodahito. It was 15,000 strong with 14,000 samurai and attendants, and 1,000 shinobi. Colonel Takahashi, who was ranked as a Jounin in Iwagakure, commanded the 12th Shinobi Regiment. 331st Shinobi Battalion with a strength of 300 shinobi held the Boso Hills on the left flank under Takahashi's direct command. The 3rd Regiment of the Earth Army held the left flank proper with a company of grass samurai for a total of 3,500 infantry. Lieutenant Colonel Toyota Akira commanded it. The center of the line was held by the 5,000-strong 1st Regiment and commanded by Colonel Takuji Sasaki. The right flank was held by 5,500-strong 7th Regiment and a detachment of 700 ninja from the 17th and 401st Shinobi Battalions. Overall command of this force lay with Colonel Kawayama Yaechi with Major Osamu, Jounin in Iwagakure, commanding the Shinobi complement. Osamu was a decorated veteran of the current war who was competent at his job and at leading men. Although he was not yet 20 years old, he had risen very fast through the ranks by virtue of his skills and ability. It was for this ostentatious reason that Jounin Takahashi put him in command of the 2 companies on the right while he commanded the lone company facing the fire shinobi on the left. Kodahito's army was significantly stronger on his left flank than on the right. This was per design. He aimed to use Major Osamu's shinobi in particular against the vulnerable infantry squares. Earth and Grass samurai would fall upon the disarrayed ranks of the infantry, and when the right flank folded inward, they would turn the flank and trap the fire army. XXXX Command Post, 7th Regiment, right flank, Earth and Grass Army. The enemy has batteries of siege engines on the right and left flanks, the Shinobi Intel liaison of the 7th Regiment and member of the Kamizuru clan said to Colonel Kawayama Yaechi. Siege engines? Whatever for? Yaechi asked, rhetorically. Of course, Earth intelligence had learnt about Hai no Kuni's newfangled siege engines a long time back, but they hadn't been well studied by the intelligence community for want of resources. Traditionally, siege weapons were vulnerable to shinobi, who could defend themselves against them quite easily, and had long since fallen out of favor except in the forts and city walls of little pissant states in the ass end of nowhere. It was a widely held belief by the Earth Command staff that the siege engines and the addition of non-samurai class volunteers into the ranks of infantry were a sign of fire's desperation and an indication of a serious dearth of quality men of proper birth and station. Then, mulling it over, because he did not want to be the commander who got caught with his pants down by the village idiot, Yaechi said, "My compliments to the samurai commanders, but have the shinobi units increased dispersion a little? No point in unnecessarily risking casualties from boulders or burning jars of oil. My compliments to Jounin Osamu, ask him to expedite his preparations for the assault." "Yes, sir, XXXX command post, right flank, fire army. My eyesight is not what it used to be, but I think the enemy is ordering his troops to disperse a bit," Kaneda, Major Korechika Anami said to his aide. "You're correct, Major," Lieutenant Okubo Yu replied, squinting at the arrayed ranks of the enemy. "The shinobi look like they'd be about ready to launch an assault in another 10 minutes. We can't have that, can we?" Anami replied. "Are the batteries set up?" "Yes, Major." "Good." He turned to the artillery commander, "If you would be so kind as to order your batteries to fire when ready, Edo." "Of course, Major." To his signalman, he said, "Fire Plan A." XXXX Plan A was as simple as such things come. A single heavy catapult would use incendiary shells to discover range. Subsequently, once range was identified, the whole heavy catapult battery would fire for effect, a full salvo at the enemy. There were several types of shells for the catapults. Smoke, incendiary, FAE and fragmentation. XXXX 17th and 401st Shinobi Battalion, right flank, Earth and Grass Army standing in the front ranks. IWA Genin Akifumi had rather keen eyes and he squinted at the first of the catapulted shells arcing through the air towards his unit. He judged that the first shot was going to be fall at least 50 yards behind the last rank. Sure enough, the shell crashed into the ground and splashed fire in an oval about 5 meters long and 2 meters wide. The flames were a bit more intense than the Katan Jutsu he'd seen his Junin sensei use and a lot more long-lived, but there was plenty of time for his superiors to anticipate and react to them. Someone jeered at the catapultiers for the obvious miss and others cheered. If the enemy could not even properly aim fire with their weapons, then this battle was going to be a walk in the park. "Hold your ground," the Chunin commanding his section shouted. "Maintain ranks and silence. Do not begin the assault until you have your orders." The second shell hit about 24 meters in front and slightly to the right of Akifumi. Again, the flames failed to impress and there were louder catcalls and jeers at the catapultiers. Their voices wouldn't carry the distance to the enemy, but it was the sentiment and the morale boost that it gave one's fellow warriors that counted. The third shell landed slightly off-center Akifumi's company. One of the dozen jounin, Akifumi didn't know which one, used an earth jutsu to watch the shell and to contain and ultimately, smother the flames. There were no injuries. The catcalls and jeers were loud enough to hurt Akifumi's ear at this point. He did not mind, however, because he was shouting the IWA war cry himself. XXXX Command Post, Artillery Battery, right flank, Fire Army, FO confirms the last one was on target. Calibrate catapults per FDC's instructions. First load FAE, followed by fragmentation. Load and sound off, the chief gunner ordered. light catapults to have a round ready for fire on the catapult. Immediately, the catapult crews began the work of adjust their machines per the FDC's instructions. It was but a minute before the last of them sounded off. Catapult 3 ready to fire, the last catapult crew sounded off. The FDC conveyed further instructions to arm the shells, and the gunners dutifully attached arming seals to the shells and activated them. On my mark, fire for effect. XXXX 17th and 401st Shinobi Battalion, right flank, Earth and Grass Army. Akifumi watched the incoming flight of shells without trepidation. His pre-battle jitters were a thing of the past, and his morale was as high as it was ever going to get. The shells were useless against Shinobi but for the chakra used to block them. In a few minutes, he and the others would be ordered into the assault. He could not wait to get his hands on the undefended fire pseudo-infantry, and they would suffer. XXXX The 4 shells were shot without a second of each other. They were complicated devices with a hollow shell of wrought iron that was half a centimeter thick. The handcrafted arming seals, there were printed seals on the newest shells in the inventory, were designed to supply a precise pulse of chakra into the hollow shell that would in turn activate other seals inside the sphere. One seal was designed to weaken molecular bonds in crystal and destroy the integrity of the metal wall. A hybrid storage and molecular bond weakening seal encapsulated a 14 kg cylinder of propane. There were 10 of the latter seals printed on little strips of paper and pasted at precise points on the inner face of the sphere. There was a spring-loaded launcher mechanism mounted on a gyroscope to fire little sparklers on parachutes. The gyroscope, the spring-loaded launcher and the sparklers were protected from the destabilizer seal with yet another seal. The shell wall destabilizer and the storage seals were designed to fire simultaneously. In this case, they activated at a height of 40 meters above ground. 4 of the storage seals failed to activate because of misalignment. The launchers had been tested exhaustively, on the other hand, and they worked as advertised, shooting sparklers about 15 meters into the air. The gas cylinder walls collapsed as soon as the storage seal broke containment, and 4 non-intersecting clouds of propane expanded rapidly in the air, mixing freely with atmospheric oxygen and forming an explosive cocktail. The clouds had close to 500 kilograms by weight of propane in them and were separated by less than 100 meters each. The sparklers ignited and slowly drifted towards the ground and the propane cloud. Roughly 5 seconds after the seals activated, the first of the sparklers met the cloud. XXXX Akifumi and the others stared questioningly at the portion of the sky where the shells had blown apart into little pieces without little pouts that posed no danger to the shinobi beneath. Was that a whole salvo of squibs? A few recognized the danger from the sparklers and the invisible cloud, having seen or heard of Leaf Anbu use a version of this weapon in other battlefields, but with only a few seconds to act, there was no time to save everyone. They shouted a hasty warning to the unwary others to save themselves from the impending explosion. And before the sparklers reached the propane-saturated explosive mixture, they used jutsu to burrow themselves into the ground, praying that the seal on their burrowed tunnels held. The clouds of propane ignited nigh simultaneously, the heat from the first setting off the rest so quickly that to the observer, it looked as if the skies over the Iwa and Kusa Shinobi had ignited in one massive, earth-shattering explosion. A mushroom cloud half a kilometer in diameter bloomed into the clouds. The shockwave knocked the infantry from the 44th Battalion, 3rd Restoration Brigade that were gathered 600 yards away off their feet. Akifumi did not get a chance to scream. He was directly under one of the clouds and was instantly carbonized. Around him, his nearest neighbors suffered the same fate. Further out, men and women and boys and girls were torn limb from limb, decapitated, and generally visited all manner of indignities that could be visited on the human body. All told, about 200 genin, 30-odd chunin and 2 jounin were killed or wounded in that single strike. The samurai of the 7th Regiment fared better, but being in the neighborhood and not the immediate vicinity of a thermobaric explosion isn't a kindness in any sense of the word. All told, 400 samurai were killed from rent limbs, collapsed lungs and all sorts of horrors in the 7th Regiment. Another 1,000 lay wounded on the field. XXXX Command Post, Earth and Grass Army, holy shit, what the fuck was that? Brigadier Kodahito spoke in surprise, a fair amount of fear leaking in his voice before he gained control of himself. The last thing he needed after the unfolding disaster on the right was to have his subordinates panic because he wasn't feeling all that steady at the moment himself. XXXX Command Post, Right Flank, Fire Army, did you plan for that? Major Anami asked his artillery officer. That worthy shook his head, his eyes fixed on the mushroom cloud. He appeared to be in shock himself. We'd tested the weapons, individually, of course, but never multiple ones simultaneously or in such close proximity, he responded in a little voice. Anami shrugged. That was way too big a hammer to crack that particular bunch of eggs, but in war, too much wasn't nearly as much of a problem as too little. XXXX Command Post, Fire Army, Kami, what the hell was that? Colonel Takamori wondered aloud. The next nearest thing to hell on earth, I shouldn't wonder, sir, his aide responded. The colonel shook his head and chuckled at his unperturbed aide's tone. Provided he survived, the boy would go far if he could be calm in the face of such a shock as that explosion. Bloody hell. That was as bad as a Baijimaru. I don't think we'd have to worry about that flank much anymore. They're in absolute chaos. So are our folks, sir. Looks to me like our officers are having a bit of trouble falling the men into their squares again. That's as it may be, but the other side is wiped out. They'll take even longer to rally for an assault, if at all they can be rallied. Signal the 31st. My compliments to Lieutenant Colonel Beppu Shinsuke, he is to begin the planned assault on the 3rd Regiment XXXX Command Post, 31st Battalion, left flank, Fire Army, signal from the command post from Colonel Takamori, sir. Give it to me, Lieutenant Colonel Shinsuke nodded, his gaze on the ranks of the enemy forces arrayed on the field against his searching for signs of unsteadiness after the Holocaust on the right flank. He spared a moment to read the note and a smile lit his face. Turning to his left, he addressed the artillery CO, begin bombardment of the enemy lines. Yes, sir. Do you want to use FAE on the opening salvo as well or shall we go with the prepared stonk? We'll go with the prepared stonk. I want to use the new troops on those bastards to show them that our infantry are as dangerous as our artillery. Yes, sir. Nodding acknowledgement, the lieutenant colonel addressed his staff. Signal assault in 15. Yes, sir. After what the artillery did on the right flank, I can't wait to see what those noble-born thieves and rapists do when we open up on them. XXXX Command Post, 3rd Regiment, left flank, Earth and Grass Army. After witnessing firsthand the destruction of the 2 Shinobi companies and the decimation of the 7th Regiment, Lieutenant Colonel Akira, commander of the 3rd Regiment, Earth and Grass Army, didn't need to be a genius to figure out that the fire artillery were a death sentence hanging over his men's necks. Signal Jounin Takahashi. My compliments to the Jounin. He is to leave behind a small holding force to guard his position and advance on that catapult battery. His mission is to destroy the artillery at all costs. Yes, sir. XXXX. The sight of men clamoring around one of the catapults sent a jolt of panic through the earth and grass line. The ranging shots, which were again incendiary, were almost enough to cause a rout. The line officers increased the dispersion between men to unheard levels, 3 or 4 yards between one samurai and the next, and used the harshest discipline, cutting down anyone that strayed from their ranks to ensure discipline. The first shell was an undershot. The second overshot and the third veered too far to the left from a sudden gust of wind. The fourth was on close enough to be counted on target, though there were no casualties. But samurai shuffled nervously through the ranks. Men who would walk unflinchingly into certain combat and death flinch at the thought of being burned alive, after all. A salvo of 10 shells arced through the air at the third. "Stand firm the third," an officer shouted. Far better to die standing tall on one's feet and facing the enemy than to die running away from him. The honor of the regiment demanded nothing less. The shells detonated. XXXX. The shells were bigger and more powerful copies of the grenades used by Konoha ANBU. They were hollow balls with thin walls of wrought iron, all the better for fragmenting into shrapnel, with a powerful explosive seal that had a chakra storage module. The arming seal on the outside supplied the timer and detonator modules. The detonator module pulsed chakra in a specific sequence to detonate the explosive seal. XXXX. Shards of razor-sharp iron scythed through the ranks of the samurai, mowing down dozens. The wounded and the dying screamed for help. As officers tried to restore discipline and steady the ranks, a second salvo and then a third exploded overhead, adding to the mayhem and increasing the butcher's bill. XXXX. Company Command Post, 331st Shinobi Battalion, right flank, Earth and Grass Army. Jounin Takahashi read the missive brought by the messenger and then at the pouts of aerial explosions over the 3rd Regiment from his vantage point. Sighing, he shook his head. He could see the regiment wavering before him down on the plain and knew that whatever he did, the damage was already done today. But if he failed in his duties, it was perfectly possible that the paranoid Tsuchikage would order him quartered for treason. "Jounin Akagi, you're to take 1st and 3rd companies down the hill, bypassing the enemy shinobi positions and destroy the enemy's artillery battery at all costs. Go." "All right, Takahashi, but I don't see us saving those poor bastards in the 3rd. Most we can do is exact revenge today." "Then exact revenge we must. And while you do that, I'll keep our friends the hills engaged." Akagi nodded and turned to shout orders for his command to leave their prepared positions and assemble. XXXX. 17th and 401st Shinobi Battalion, right flank, Earth and Fire Army. On emerging from the tunnel he'd hidden in, Jounin Osamu fought the impulse to empty his stomach contents. He'd thought he was as hard as they came, but the air was thick with the stink of burnt pork and the landscape was straight out of a slaughterhouse with dismembered bodies littered everywhere. His cursory glance for survivors showed him none. With a deep shuddering breath, he looked around and cast his eyes on the other lucky souls burrowing out of their tunnels then. Some genin freshly emerged from tunnels milled aimlessly while others vomited their hasty breakfasts. The other Jounin and Chunin weren't that much better either. Osamu opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He cleared his throat and tried again. "The enemy and revenge is that way. Get the genin pointed in the right direction," he ordered a nearby Chunin. The Chunin looked him askance. "Get moving, Chunin," Osamu repeated in his best command voice and to reinforce his words, slapped the man. "Yes, sir." XXXX. 331st Shinobi Battalion, left flank, Earth and Grass Army. Jounin Akagi looked at his command. 200 shinobi were a large enough number that he had to stand on a boulder to address them and raise his voice to be heard. "Our mission is simple. We have to knock out the enemy artillery. But the simple become exceedingly complex in the whirlwind of war. We can't concentrate our numbers and attack their position because a lucky hit would put paid to our mission then. So, we're going to disperse. You will all operate as independent teams. Try to support each other as much as possible. Jounins and Chunins, take command of your teams. I'll see you on the other side." XXXX Command Post, a shinobi company, left flank, Fire Army. Genma. "Yes, Niji." One of the IWA Jounin are addressing a crowd of about 200 shinobi, Jounin Hyuga Niji reported. "He isn't talking about your hair, is he?" Genma asked jovially, eyeing his subordinate. Niji's face remained a blank mask. Genma shrugged internally. One of these days, he would get a reaction from the stoic Hyuga. He is planning on taking a detachment down to the plain to attack the artillery battery. That would put a dampener on our plans, wouldn't it? Niji did not reply. "Anything else?" They're planning to split into teams to avoid presenting a single target to the artillery. Gunma smiled. They are they? Well, we can't have them feeling unwelcome, can we? Pass the word. We'll go down to the hills and greet them. The battle plan? Niji asked. Is no more. We've made contact with the enemy and as is only natural, he has fucked up our plans. So, let me repeat myself. Pass the word. We're going to get between the Mad Iwanin and our innocent comrades in arms down on the plain. We have this one thing going for us. We have to run a shorter distance than them and we can beat them to the plain but only if we start now. Niji nodded minutely. He knew as well as Gunma that though fire had decisively won the engagement on the right flank, the battle was far from won. If the IWA Shinobi overran the artillery position and fell upon the 31st after they'd committed to the attack on the enemy's 3rd Regiment, it was possible that they would rout the 31st and the fire left flank would collapse. And all said and done, given the numerical disparity, a positive decision on the left was far more important to fire than it was for earth on the right. XXXX Command Post, 31st Battalion, left flank, Fire Army as Lieutenant Colonel Beppu Shinsuke watched, another salvo of fragmentation shells exploded over the heads of the 3rd Regiment. Close to a 70 shells had been launched so far and the enemy was staggering from the blows. Shinsuke estimated 1,000 dead or wounded at this point. Sir, compliments from Jounin Gunma. He reports that the enemy ninja are about to come marching down the hill. Shinsuke's aide said. And what does Jounin Gunma deign to do about it? The lieutenant Call asked. He's announced his intention to abandon his defensive position and move to block the enemy shinobi, sir. But he expects the enemy to leave a force to pin him. Task the artillery to clear the force that is pinning him. A brief pause to organize his thoughts. My compliments to the Jounin. Let him to make haste. Yes, sir. And sound the advance. We've got those bastards in the 3rd Regiment by their balls and I have no intention of letting go at this point. Yes, sir. XXXX 17th and 401st Shinobi Battalion, right flank, Earth and Fire Army. The IWA Shinobi advanced into the fire. The shells were falling on them steadily now and they'd lost more to the deathly rain of iron, but they held because of Osamu. The major did not even consider dispersing his nin at this point. The men needed the comforting and steadying presence of each other after the events of the day. Take that away and they would rout. Still, he commanded a bare 100 at this point and many were walking wounded, some were expectant, but they were determined and death alone could stop them, but that was okay. They would soon be too close for the catapult to rain fire on them and then, it would be their turn. XXXX Command Post, Artillery Battery, right flank, Fire Army. Enemies entering range of the light catapults, the FO reported. Are the light catapults laid in? The chief gunnery officer asked. They are. And the shells? Fragmentation. Fire on my mark. Fire. XXXX 17th and 401st Shinobi Battalion, right flank, Earth and Fire Army. It was once again a massacre. The difference between the light and the heavy catapults had to do with their range and not with the weight of shell they could fire. This meant that when the light catapults joined the heavies, the fire had increased from 4 to 29. Further, the light catapults could be fired much faster than the heavy. Men and women fell and died on their foot. Regardless, under Osamu's leadership, the line advanced. They'd slowed and with their dwindled numbers, they didn't have a hope of accomplishing their mission, but they were beyond duty and comradeship and stupidity now. It was at once infinitely brave and utterly insane. XXXX Command Post, 31st Battalion, left flank, Fire Army. Lieutenant Colonel Shinsuke spared a glance to the rear. He wanted to be sure of the artillery's position before he passed the next order. Sure enough, the catapult crews were manhandling the machines and keeping pace with the infantry. Surprisingly enough, they were maintaining their fire while leapfrogging. Their positions in ones and twos. Come tomorrow, Shinsuke was sure that the men would be bedridden from their exertions, but by the kami, they were keeping up. Cease fire on the 3rd Regiment. I think they've had it. Shift fire to the 1st, XXXX 331st Shinobi Battalion, left flank, Earth and Grass Army. Colonel Takahashi cursed the gods and scurried to the next cover as a FAE shell exploded not too far from him. The enemy was firing a mix of FAE and fragmentation. The rate of fire wasn't all that impressive, but he'd already lost a dozen men. Worse still, while the shells were raining down on him, his men couldn't move fast enough to pin the Leaf Nin, who were falling out of their positions and advancing down the hill as fast as their legs could carry them to block Akagi's force. Boom! Another FAE. Fuck, XXXX command post, fire army, signal the 32nd to advance, Colonel Seigo Takamori ordered his aide. He'd been observing the flow of the battle and it was clear that at this point, the only thing that was holding the IWA army in place was their untouched center. XXXX 31st Battalion, left flank, fire army. Shinsuke sang a dirty ditty and made obscene gestures at the 3rd Regiment now that there was less than 300 yards distance between the front ranks. He stopped singing for a moment to pass a single order. Unleash the dogs of war. With that command, he'd freed his shock troops to spread as much mayhem as men might. XXXX command post, 3rd Regiment, left flank, Earth and Grass Army. Lieutenant Colonel Toyota Akira could only stare flabbergasted as several hundred fire infantrymen, all of whom oozed oodles of power, crashed into his wavering front ranks. Fear equals exhaustion on the battlefield, and Offit and his samurai had been scared within an inch of their life today by a foe that they could not touch or harm, but which could dismember them. At this point, they were in no position to defend against garrison troops, much less shinobi. For those men felling his wantonly were no samurai. The 3rd had lost more than 1,000 dead and wounded so far in the day. They'd seen the bodies of their friends, brothers and officers violated, and now, when they could barely focus their mind on a single thought, they were being attacked by elite troops who were fresh and raring to go. It was too much. The line unraveled. XXXX 17th and 401st Shinobi Battalion, right flank, Earth and Fire Army. 1 second, Osamu was shouting encouragement at his men. They were less than 100 yards from the enemy front ranks now, and the next, there was a huge hole in his head and his body toppled on its back. Someone screamed Osamu was dead, and that was the proverbial straw that broke the camel's back. The survivors retreated. XXXX command post, Fire Army, signal the 43rd to advance on the 7th Regiment. The artillery battery is to shift fire to support the 43rd, Colonel Takamori ordered. Yes, sir. XXXX command post, Earth and Grass Army. Brigadier Kodahito shook his head. With the left and right flank gone, the battle was a lost cause. There was nothing to do but to retire from the field. If he tarried long, he would lose his entire army, and then Iwa's position would become untenable. The brigadier's thoughts ran to his short-term prospects even as he passed orders to save the remainder of his army. He was sure a date with a knife awaited him, and after so one-sided and humiliating a loss, the idea of harakiri was positively enticing. XXXX command post, Fire Army. Takamori smiled beatifically. It had been less than half an hour since the battle started, but there was no doubt. He had to organize the chase of the retreating Earth Army, but that could wait for a few minutes while he savored the feeling. Fire had won a resounding victory on the battlefield today, and the entire IWA front was wide open. In the week since Itachi reported back at Akatsuki HQ, he noted that Toby had ordered a room prepared for himself and slept there. Perhaps the stress of the war, the severe reverses that had befallen Konoha's enemies, and the long-running failed hunt for the elusive One-Tail got to him, but Itachi wasn't going to miss such a gift horse in the mouth. Itachi did not even have to evade the Zetsu on his tail when he went walking that evening. He activated his backup plan, an unwitting sleeping agent he had placed in a strategic position a couple of years back with a simple shoulder brush in the middle of the street with a little application of chakra. Pain, Toby and the rest of the Akatsuki coterie were going to learn the error of their ways. He did not expect either of the two principal actors or the organization to survive the lesson. XXXX The Battle of the Crossing had left Rock's frontlines vulnerable. Their troops had conducted an orderly retreat to more secure positions. This allowed Team 7 to walk out of Jiraiya's redoubt and travel unmolested into Hai no Kuni and ultimately, Konoha. Upon arrival, they'd spent a whole day being debriefed, and another waving to the hoi polloi as Kakashi arranged an impromptu festival to celebrate Takamori's victory against Rock and the return of Leaf's heroes. Then had followed an endless series of meetings concluding with the present, which in Naruto's opinion was the most important of all. So, that is what I want to talk about, Kakashi-sensei, Naruto wrapped up. Kakashi cleared his throat and leaned back into his seat. Some days, it just did not pay to get out of bed, and after hearing what Naruto had to say, he felt that today was one of them. Never mind that Kakashi thought that there was some merit to the idea, but his children were proposing to step into a jump headlong into a pit of vipers. The fact that they were the heroes of the Fourth Shinobi War was not going to help them any if the wrong people took offense. I'm thinking of a word to describe what I feel, Naruto, he replied after a turn. Pig-headed, stupid, idiot, dead man walking. None of them quite catch the entirety of my feelings. Frankly, I'm at a loss for words. I know that there is a danger, sensei, but these last few months, I've been thinking about my legacy. Naruto returned the Godame's gaze stubbornly. Right now, I'm the biggest one-day mass murderer in history. I don't want to be remembered for it. I want to leave something worthwhile behind. Kakashi chuckled and shook his head. Not even 17 and already thinking about your legacy. Hopefully, you have many decades ahead of you, Naruto. You needn't plunge into the world-saving business right away, you know. You just got yourself back together after saving Konoha and look what it took out of you. Naruto pinched his lips, but his eyes did not stray. Kakashi sighed. He cast his eyes at his other children. And the two of you are with him? He asked. We stand with him, Kakashi-sensei, Sakura replied. Even when he's being a daft moron, Sasuke added. Kakashi nodded. So be it. I'll call for a meeting of the junta. But be aware. I cannot do a damn thing to protect you if they take offense at your ideas. The junta is still finding its feet and I dare not impose any authority over it for fear of upsetting the status quo. Not until Iwa and Kyumo agree to peace, and perhaps not for the foreseeable future even then. We understand, sensei, Sakura replied flatly. It was what she and her teammates had expected, and under the circumstances, his neutrality was the best they could hope for. XXXX The duty guards paid scant attention to Nakamura Tetsu, maintenance guy at Akatsuki HQ, when he reported at the guard station around mid-morning. He was accompanied by 6 porters, all of whom were vetted and had the right clearances to work in the building, carrying cylinders on their shoulders. Morning, Tetsuzan, the lead guard said, thrusting a scroll at him. Need your signature for the cylinders. What are they for? The building environmental system, Kaitazan. Quarterly refill of refrigerant. I'd put in a request 2 dats back, Tetsu replied, initialing the form and producing relevant paperwork. Nagata Keita, the lead guard, checked the documents and nodded approval. Everything looks proper. You can proceed. Have a good day, Tetsuzan. And a good day to you as well. The guards turned back to their duty, the minimum requirements of standard operating procedure satisfied, and Tetsu walked into the building with disguised cylinders of compressed carbon monoxide. He had the porters lug the cylinders to the top of the building and drop them off at the environmental systems. For the rest of the day, Tetsu went about his regular work for the rest of the day, tackling the many little breakdowns that occurred daily in high rises. At 9 in the night, he informed his colleagues he was going to work on environmental systems. Since Tetsu was known for keeping long hours, he was married, but he and his wife weren't on the best of terms, and he actively tried to minimize the time he spent at home. None found this suspicious. With a bright smile on his face, he then proceeded to bypass the carbon monoxide filters and hook the cylinders in a daisy chain to the air circulation system. Finally, he turned the circulation down to 0.5 liters per second per person and returned to his seat to catch up on paperwork with a smile on his face. Such was the power of Shirshue's Koto Amatsukami. XXXX Itachi stayed away from Akatsuki HQ the whole day on the pretext of stretching his muscles, taking no steps to elude his tail Zetsu. In the evening, he had a nice long dinner at a nearby restaurant, after which he allowed himself to be invited to the rooms of one of the servers who was sweet on him. He and the girl, Kasumi, had a passionate love-making session late into the night. When his partner was finally exhausted, Itachi bid her good night, placed a subtle genjutsu on Zetsu and returned to his rooms. It was just over 4 hours since Tetsu released the carbon monoxide into the air ducts. The guards at the front desk were confused and incapacitated but conscious, which was expected given that the main doorway was open, and the hallways on the upper floors empty, which was again expected as it was the middle of the night. But when Itachi checked the duty stations on each floor, the guards were insensate or comatose. Not wanting to be exposed to the CO any longer than necessary, Itachi quickly made his way to Tobi's room. Surprisingly, he found Black Zetsu alongside Tobi laid out on the bed. Black Zetsu was almost always with his white counterpart that Itachi had forgotten the two were two separate and intelligent beings. Luckily for Itachi, the Zetsu's presence had not ruined the plan. He was dead and Tobi was clinging on to life, if barely. A slit throat was enough to put an end to that. Before he left the room, he carefully plucked the evolved Sharingan out, sealed it and the corpses separately, and set a timed incendiary tag. There was no sense in leaving such a powerful tool lying around for enemies of Konoha to find and use, after all. Konan and Nagato were dead in their rooms. He sealed the former and left behind an incendiary tag, and dug out and crushed the latter's Rinnegan. The first Hokage had made a serious mistake so many years back when he let his defeated friend keep those eyes. Peace in the elemental nations was elusive enough without the power of a god thrown into the mix, and Itachi wasn't ready to trust himself with the Rinnegan, much less anyone else. He also sealed Nagato's body, but unlike the other corpses, he did not plan to share it with Konoha for analysis and meant to dispose of it himself at his leisure. Incendiaries may not do a thorough job of destroying the Akatsuki leader's remains, and a body that had hosted the Rinnegan could yield secrets that were almost as deadly as the eyes themselves. His work done, Itachi calmly walked out the building and vanished into the night as Ames. Perpetual rain sputtered to a stop. It was time to return his loot to Konoha. XXXX The Raikage stared at the report of the Battle of the Crossing and uncharacteristically scratched his head. "Boss," Darui prompted, "we need to get this information and our recommendation to the daimyo fast." A tilted his head and balefully eyed Darui. "I'm not happy at all." "Because Hai no Kuni won?" Darui asked. "Don't be an idiot, Darui, and use that brain of yours. I'm not worried that Fire won and our allies in Stone lost. We were going to gain territory in Rice irrespective of the outcome. The only difference is the size of our gains. For that matter, I'm even willing to forego all that new territory if Fire does so as well, and the Fuma clan will shift to a neutral posture betwixt us. No, what makes me unhappy is that Fire are somehow able to train men who were civilians less than 2 years ago as a frontline unit of chakra-enhanced shock troops. The evidence suggests they have made a fundamental breakthrough in training, tactics, and/or capabilities, and their recruitment pool has exponentially increased as a result. That bodes ill for us in future conflicts." Darui looked thoughtful. "I get it. It takes a village more than a decade and training from early childhood to turn 1 in 100 children with reasonably strong chakra into a shinobi powerhouse. But whatever Leaf has done apparently allows them to take any healthy civilian off the street and pit a few of them against those same shinobi with reasonable odds of victory. That turns the existing power structure completely on its head. Precisely, A said. So what do we recommend we do? Either Leaf shares the secret of their nuclear weapon or the secret of these chakra-enhanced civilians, or we have no choice but to form an alliance and declare war when it is still early days still for their advances to tilt the scales overwhelmingly in their favor. Giving them breathing room now would only give them time to grow stronger still. They have handily defeated Wind and Rock, boss. It doesn't look like there are too many potential allies left on the table for us. If Konoha is intent on hoarding these weapons and preserving their military superiority, Darui, the balance of power between the elemental nations is shot. Either Hitaki Kakashi agrees to share these weapons like Senju Hashirama did the tailed beasts, or it is war. Yes, boss. So, what are you waiting for? The Raikage asked impatiently. Compose a message to the daimyo outlining these thoughts and start shortlisting personnel who'll lead delegations to Leaf, Suna, Iwa and Kiri XXXX. I didn't think I'd ever feel this way again, but it feels good to be back in Konoha, Naruto exclaimed, walking down Konoha's main street, his voice brimming with joy and excitement. Sakura and Sasuke, who were a couple of paces ahead of him, shook their heads. Hard to believe that their friend had made a full recovery from the depression and despondency that had taken him after he destroyed Grass. It'd have been better still if you'd kept your mouth shut and not asked Kakashi's permission to address the council and shinobi and samurai clan heads, Sasuke griped. The gods created you a sourpuss, Sasuke, Naruto responded, to ruin my day. But it's not going to work this time. I'm walking on the clouds. I'm floating in the air. You cannot disturb my zen. Pause. It won't be long, I swear. Maybe an hour at most. Sasuke grunted but did not respond. It wasn't that Sasuke disagreed with Naruto's conclusions, he had helped Naruto crystallize his thoughts, after all, but he knew that it was very probable that Naruto's speech today was going to earn the three of them the enmity of the council and clans, who would see his proposals as undermining their authority and upending the established social order. People who fell into that category had a short life expectancy in the elemental nations. Sasuke had lost one family and gained another, but it looked very much like he was going to lose this one as well. We owe it to Itachi and Naruto, Sasuke, Sakura reminded her friend softly. She thought they were walking to their deaths, too, but they owed it to Naruto to stand by him. I know. There's nothing for it but to get this over with, Sasuke grunted. He consoled himself that at least this time he would not survive his family by long. XXXX The council, clan heads, representatives of samurai warmly greeted Team 7 with well wishes and whatnot. This was the informal junta of shinobi and samurai that had taken control of Hai no Kuni after the late daimyo's death and the seppuku of his wannabe successors. This was the most powerful group in individuals in the elemental nations now that Hai no Kuni had re-established its preeminence. When everyone was settled in their seats, Kakashi called the meeting to order. No urgent business, really, but Naruto wanted to address you folks, he said without ado. He'd had a word in private about Naruto's intended speech with those he'd considered close allies, and hadn't even been able to get their support. He'd thought that with the war drawing to an end, he'd have to deal with less worry and stress, but as things stood, his children were going to be the death of him. Naruto, they're all yours. Thanks, Godaima-sama, Naruto spoke formally. I know that you're all busy men and women, overseeing the conduct of the Fourth Shinobi War in its many fronts, and I'm very grateful to you and the Hokage for making the time from your busy schedules to listen to me. I would be much obliged if you'd hold your questions till I open the floor for discussion at the end. Pause. Good. Thank you. I want to broach a subject that is also a fond and elusive dream of mine, and I hope everyone in this room. My dream is peace. Before you close your eyes and dismiss me as a raving madman, I'll clarify that I don't mean perpetual peace between nations. Frankly, I don't think we can ever have anything more than brief islands of peace where nations catch breath between wars as they jostle for space, resources, position, et al. No, by peace, I mean rule of law and order within a nation where the weak aren't meat for the strong. There are those among you in whom the Sannin Jiraiya has confided his dream ending the cycle of hatred. It is Jiraiya Sensei's fondest hope that there'll come a day when a child of prophecy will appear and put an end to all the hate in the world. Jiraiya Sensei's dream is commendable, but hate isn't something that can be destroyed. Certainly not by a messiah acting alone. I've had a lot of free time in my hands these last few months. There were scattered chuckles at that as everyone knew about Naruto's breakdown and recovery, and I've spent most of it thinking. I believe hate is the child of our society and an innate part of our humanity. To be rid of it is to cut out a part of ourselves. We would not be the same without it. At the same time, we don't want hate to consume our lives. But therein lies the crux of the problem. The elemental nations, this world of Shinobi, is a world ruled by fear and hatred, and is out of balance. The four great wars between the elemental nations and the innumerable civil wars and failed revolutions in the few decades since the establishment of the hidden villages is evidence enough of this. We're better off today than we were during the era of the warring clans, but our world is still defined by violence and the application of it. We have this wonderful tool called chakra that allows a few of us gifted with copious amounts of it to perform miracles. Be they for good or ill. We have genetic mutations that gives an even smaller number an innate advantage in harnessing and expressing chakra. It is said by the wise that chakra was the gift of the sage of the six paths to all humanity. The way chakra is expressed, harnessed and used, however, it is a curse. Chakra is not present in equal amounts in everyone, and only a few, most of whom end up as samurai or shinobi, have the talent for harnessing and expressing it. Chakra does not care whether its user has a heart of gold or is as blackhearted a monster as ever walked the earth. It simply is. On the other hand, chakra gives those gifted with it a peerless advantage over those without and creates a disparity in power. The largesse of chakra is the primary criteria for ascendancy to power in the elemental nations, and other better criteria for leadership are pushed aside, complicating our problems. A samurai held up a hand. I know that you asked us to wait till you're done before we ask questions, but I think this one can't wait. Are you claiming that chakra is the root cause of all evil? He asked. Naruto shook his head. No. Chakra simply is. Men are evil or good. Then where are you going with this? Aburame Shibi asked in a measured voice, as members of that clan were wont. I'm saying that chakra is power. Power over those without or those with less, which opens the way for the strong exploiting the weak. Further, unlike other forms of power, political succession and continuity in this world of chakra is fraught with peril, because while a father or mother can be exceptionally strong chakra adepts, it does not naturally follow that the child is as well. This means that power structures within and between families, clans, nations, et al. Are forever being changed as every new expressed talent tips the balance. And without that balance, it is very hard to achieve long-term stability with peace and prosperity. All power is fleeting, Nara Shikaku pointed out, wryly. Is there any particular reason why you're focusing on the power wielded by chakra adepts? Chakra adepts make or break nations in our world. The difference in power between chakra adepts and others is mind-boggling. Kisame of the Seven Swordsmen of Kiri, an exceptional chakra adept, decapitated the nation's leadership when he assassinated the daimyo, his family and advisors. He was acting alone and outside the law without support then. Just think about it. One man, by his lonesome self, being able to do such a thing. Akatsuki's leader destroyed T's capital by himself. My actions in Kusa and that of my team in Suna went a long way towards winning the current war. The Yondaime single-handedly won the Third Shinobi War. Worse still, the death of the first Hokage created enough of a power vacuum that led to the Second Shinobi War. I reiterate, the other forms of power do not compare. They aren't even on the same scale. Pause. I guess this has become a free-for-all, after all. And I wasn't doing much good with that speech. I was rambling and I can tell I wasn't moving your hearts with it. So, rather than bore you with a memorized speech, why don't we have an open-ended Q&A session? Go ahead and ask your questions. I'll try my best to answer them. So, to attain peace, we should seal away chakra? Nara Shikaku asked, eyes narrowed. He knew of Naruto's theory from Shikamaru and Kakashi, but it sounded impractical to his ears. Nevertheless, he was intrigued. That sounds too much like the Yondaime Kazekage and his bloodline purges. The room went alive without whispers and mutters at Shikaku's words. Perhaps the war had used up Naruto, after all, and it was better to shelve their plans for him as a leader and sideline him. They could let the general population idolize him as a hero and a model citizen while removing him from public life. Sensing the shifting mood, Naruto held up his hand. He was losing the members of the junta, which did not bode well for his ideas and possibly, his life. He thought the latter was very unlikely, but one can never predict what paranoid men, which the junta most certainly was made of, would do. I suggest no such thing, Jounin Commander, he replied loud enough to be heard over the din. It would be an abomination. What then do you suggest? Another samurai asked, belligerently. You've all read the summary of the Battle of the Crossing. It was a great victory for Hai no Kuni and it turns the tide of the war, but the battle is going to occupy a special place in history for another reason. For the first time in history, we were able to take farmers and merchants without strong chakras off the street and with seals of power, put them on an even footing with samurai and ninja who have been trained since they were young in the use of chakra. That is the stuff of revolutions and it gives us an opportunity. In answer to your question, Lord, I suggest we go the other extreme. Instead of trying to wipe out chakra adepts, ensure that chakra usage becomes widespread among the general population by disseminating the seals of power. We get the importance of what transpired at the Battle of the Crossing, Naruto, Hyuga Hayashi replied, waving off Naruto's words. He was a staunch traditionalist and conservative, and even he understood that war would never be the same again. But revolutionizing warfare or not, he looked askance at the thought of disturbing the political order on a whim. However, I'm not sure I agree with this notion of disseminating powerful techniques to the mob. It will not help the security situation at all. No offense intended, Hayagasama and other members of the junta, but I'm not sure you grasp all the potential ramifications. These new seals are not quantum advances over earlier ones, but represent a fundamental breakthrough. Traditionally, developing a sizable chakra pool and learning to express it are time-consuming, and have been the real bottlenecks to training ninja and samurai. Even nature manipulation, the so-called time-consuming skill, doesn't take as long. The new seals reduce this time to a fraction of what it used to be. Simply put, it heralds the deaths of samurai and shinobi castes. There were looks of utter disbelief around the room. Sure, the fancy seals gave oodles of power to civilians. But power alone wasn't enough, wasn't it? Skill counts for a lot, and any samurai or shinobi worth their salt were the equal of a dozen souped-up merchants and farmers, weren't they? You don't believe me? Let me see if I can make my case with an example. Pause. How many men and how many years of toil would civilians need to recreate the Valley of the End? A dozen years? 10,000 men perhaps, someone ventured in an unsure voice. That's as good a guess as any, Naruto agreed equably. And it was an unintended artifact of Senju Hashirama's and Uchiha Madara's battle for dominance. The Valley of the End is an extreme example, but it illustrates the kind of power differential that exists between those with chakra and those without. With the new seals of power, that differential will still exist, but it becomes much less. It took those two legends their whole lives, extraordinary talent and natural skill to grow that powerful. The wielders of these new seals, while they will not be that powerful, will need much less time to grow into theirs. Imagine starting from scratch and producing someone as powerful as a Jounin in 5 years. What geniuses such as Uchiha Itachi and our own Yondaime did, the new seals will do to the weakest members of our society. These seals will put an end to the lopsided power enjoyed by chakra adepts, and while this will increase political stability, ironically, it will also destroy our two castes. Your argument is logical, Naruto. But I wonder if you've extrapolated it to its logical conclusion. If everyone can be as powerful as the men in this room and the seals are really the death knell of the samurai and shinobi, why should we release them to the world at large? I'm sure all of us appreciate your candor and earnestness, but has it occurred to you that you're asking us to help you dig our own graves? Hatake Kakashi pointed out. The question needed asking, and better he do it than some other member of the junta. There were murmurs of assent. The faces in the room were grim now. The answer is twofold, Yondaime-sama. First, the seals have been used in battle, and you can be sure that there are others among our friends and foes who realize the significance of what happened at the river. It is already too late to censor the news and suppress the technology because we have demonstrated its application in the real world and everyone knows it is possible. You can be sure that right now, or pretty soon, they're all going to start their own research programs on seals of power. And sooner or later, someone's going to make the same fundamental breakthrough, or far more likely, steal it from us. When that happens, we'll lose total control of the situation. Second, and this follows the first, since we cannot control its spread without undermining ourselves in the long run, we should get ahead of the problem and be seen as visionaries working for the benefit of the people by guiding them into the new age. Our castes have crushed all resistance and generally had a rollicking good ride since the time of the sage. In the doing, we've made ourselves the objects of fear and hatred among the civilians. Now, imagine if they're suddenly able to stand on an equal footing with us. It'll be worse than any civil war, and it'll spell the ruin of our society. There were some glimmers of understanding in the room, but the suspicious and scornful faces still outnumbered them by far. Naruto sighed internally. The meeting was turning out even worse than he feared it would. But it would still erode our political power, Inuzuka Tsum noted. Naruto nodded, taking a moment to collect his thoughts. We have to face facts. This is the dawn of a new age. Just as Senju Hashirama heralded a new world when he formed Konoha, upsetting the balance of power across the world, so will the seals of power. We have two options before us. We can hold on to as much power as long as possible and see the entire edifice crumble around us, or we can open the door to those without today and gain another sort of power over them. And hopefully, earn ourselves a reprieve. And you advocate we do the latter, Narashikaku stated. He didn't know about the rest of the junta, but he was already convinced. He realized that he, Kakashi and whatever other supporters Naruto had won himself today were going to have the devil's own time convincing the rest of the junta to follow the Uzumaki's advice. Yes, that's correct. And while the revolution in society is the greatest threat, the seals are also a huge opportunity to uplift humanity. Shinobi and samurai monopolize chakra adepts because they are so rare out there in the real world. The strongest talents and the most flexible are rarer still. There are scarcely any to be found in science, engineering, sealing, etc., and those are usually burnt-out shinobi or samurai. But you only have to look at what Tsunade and Kabuto had done with Orochimaru's research. Or what I have done with physics theories. There's an entire world out there that we have eschewed in our blind pursuit to maintain parity of power with other nations. But these new seals of power will free us from those resource constraints. Who knows what good will come off it? Or what evil? All I hear is idealistic-sounding prattle. Boy, Koharu, who'd sat quietly until then, interrupted. She had listened to a similar speech from Orochimaru and she regretted supporting him still. And Naruto was starting to sound like the demented snake Sannin to her ears with his talk of progress and revolution and opportunities. I remember Orochimaru waxing poetic in this same room in years past, and we know what that monster did with his depraved experiments. Naruto met her eyes without flinching. He wasn't insulted that the old crone had indirectly compared him to Orochimaru. It was bound to happen and he had been prepared for it. Now, to ward off suspicions in that direction before someone decided they were doing society a favor and knifed him in the back. Honored elder, I'm not advocating perfecting humanity as Orochimaru did. Tell me, how many people die of starvation in Hai no Kuni every year? And we're one of the better off nations. Countless thousands in other nations spend their whole life in subsistence. Scrabbling from one meal to the next, never knowing when you'll have a full meal is no way to live. Granted, our duty is to think of citizens of Hai no Kuni alone, but even within our borders, we can end so many horrors that are commonplace. He turned to the group at large. A couple of hundred trained adepts in medical ninjutsu, which neither the Konoha nor the samurai clans could ever afford before, would become practical if we do this. Think of all the sick people we can cure and all the families we'll save from starvation or destruction. Think of the increased internal stability that will result because those families will no longer be destitute and driven to extreme actions. Or how about using ninjutsu adepts to ensure the fertility of the land? Or seal experts to generate power? The possibilities are endless. Koharu opened her mouth to speak, but was stopped by Nara Shikaku, who laid a hand on hers. It was likely that the late Sandaime's teammate was about to say something incendiary. Better to cut it off before it poisoned the discussion. Moreover, Naruto still hadn't answered the most important question of all. Even if everything you say is true, Naruto, you haven't addressed my question. How does any of this benefit the people in this room? We're agreed that empowering people will loosen our hold on them and weaken us badly. So, why should we do it? We'll lose the power of fear we have over them, Jounin Commander, but if we do things right, we'll gain power as teachers, mentors, visionaries, guides and benefactors. And that sort of power is stronger than the one we have over them today. It'll endure longer. Nara Shikaku granted the point with a nod. The sort of bonds that Naruto spoke of were known to be more stable than the reign of fear that was at the heart of the status quo. Out of the corner of his eyes, he noted quite a few who had been watching him keenly relax and made a mental note to approach them later as potential allies. Assuming we agree to your proposal, what do you suggest we do? Release the seals to the general populace. Institute programs to teach chakra use to civilians. We, Shinobi and samurai, hold a virtual monopoly on chakra. The monks are too few to matter. It'll earn a lot of goodwill towards us, which we'll need in the times to come, for as the proverb goes, the times, they are about to get real interesting. The junta members shared a laugh at that. As if they weren't already living in interesting times already. If we strip the samurai and shinobi ranks bare to train the civilians, what of national defense? Aburaim Shibi asked. For that matter, a lot of shinobi and samurai are unsuited for teaching or are disinclined to. Let those who would teach volunteer to do so. And let those who wouldn't, not, Naruto responded with a grin. If the junta members were not averse to discussing implementation, it boded well for his plan. There was still a wide gap between thought and action, but it was by no means unbridgeable. Sowing the kernel of an idea is always the hardest, after all. And when they aren't satisfied with just learning to use chakra? When they want us to share power, an old and wizened samurai asked. It was a very important question. Perhaps the most important of them all. If implementing Naruto's idea was going to cause the same sort of social chaos that it was meant to avoid, there was no point in doing it, was there? Then we do so. I'll reiterate. The days of the shinobi and samurai castes holding a monopoly on power are over. The world ahead is a different beast altogether, and we're going to have to reach an accommodation with it. Have you any other pearls of wisdom you want to share with us? Yamanaka Inoichi asked grumpily, raising a couple of guffaws from the samurai contingent. Naruto had the decency to blush. As it should happen, I do. But first, and without meaning to sound impertinent, allow me to ask the junta a question. Do you sleep tight these days? The legitimate daimyo is dead and his unworthy pretenders disposed. You're all doing a great job of guiding the country, but you aren't even agreed on a leader to represent you. You must all harbor fears that someone amongst you is plotting even now to seize the Fire Throne. Instead of vying for the throne, share the power and declare yourselves as the legitimate leadership body of the nation, but instead of hereditary appointments, select your successors for civic virtue. Not raw ability? Hyuga Hayashi asked with, what was for him, a big and engaging smile. Only his closest friends could tell it was fake. Succession within his clan was headache enough. He wasn't going to worry about the problem of succession in the junta, and he honestly wanted to throttle Kakashi's boy for raising the subject. Leadership ability and charisma are all well and good, Hyugasama, but no one doubts Yondaime Mizukage's leadership or charisma, and look where Mizuno Kuni ended up under him. Look also at the examples of the dead Hokages. Better yet, look at yourselves. All of you rose above clan and caste loyalties to put the good of the nation before everything else when you united against the usurpers. It is this characteristic we have to select in our leaders. You ascribe altruism to our actions, Naruto, but we were acting to save our skins. Speaking for everyone gathered here, I don't know if we would have made the right choice if we were at peace. I don't want us to be teetering on the edge of the precipice forever just so that we will all make altruistic decisions, and neither do you, yet another samurai lord noted with a grunt of laughter and a slap of his thighs. Lord, you're right that the junta originally made the decision because of the dangers confronting the nation, and that your decision may have been different if circumstances were different. But how many other nations have faced similar challenges and had their leaders fail to rise to the occasion? How many of those before you in other nations have made the absolute worst decision in similar circumstances? The very fact that you made the right decision is a big mark in your favor. I take it to mean that there is something right with the gathered group, Naruto finished, expectantly eyeing his audience. I note that you haven't addressed the second part of my statement, the samurai pointed out, worrying his teeth. Naruto nodded solemnly. You're correct. Having the country totter on the edge is no way to run it, and I do not suggest that we do. The stress of leadership is bad enough without adding the threat of disaster to the mix. But imagine the benefits if we could always select the right people to lead the nation. I can imagine pigs can fly, Naruto, but that doesn't mean a thing in the real world until I have a pig in my hand with wings. So, answer this. How would you select the right people to lead the nation? I will note that hindsight is perfect, but we don't have the benefit of it until we've acted and seen the consequences for ourselves. I will also point out that we seem to be heading away from the topic of your address, Nara Shikaku pointed out, taking the lead once again. For good or ill, he realized that he was now firmly in the Uzumaki's camp. He suspected that Naruto's ideas weren't his alone. The boy simply wasn't that intelligent, and it was clear that Shikamaru, Sasuke, Sakura and others must have helped him frame his thoughts into a coherent vision. In a moment of epiphany, the Nara clan head realized the similarity between Senju Hashirama and the boy. No great thinkers, both, but charismatic visionaries who surrounded themselves with great thinkers and effective leaders. The first Hokage had reshaped the elemental nations. Nara Shikaku suspected that the boy would go one step further than the first. We're on topic, Narasama, Naruto responded, flashing a smile. It was always my intent to address this group on the seals on power and selecting leaders. Going back to your question regarding the selection of leaders, I have the kernel of an idea, which I'm hoping that this group will develop into something practical. But before we get to that, I'll try to point out the problems with the current leadership succession processes. Our current system is one of hereditary succession at the national and clan levels. We'll ignore the issue of clan succession because that is the prerogative of the individual clan. Election of Kage is slightly different in the hidden villages, where it is de facto a popularity contest among the shinobi based on their prowess and the political support of various cliques. In hereditary succession, problems arise if the current leader dies without issue, is unpopular, is weak in character, isn't a natural leader, or is an uninterested one. More often than not, clans and nations have had to settle for less than ideal candidates because the alternative is worse. That political skill and acumen, and long vision are not inherited is a driving reason behind the short-lived nature of political dynasties, though in comparison to chakra power dynasties, political dynasties are much longer lived. Whenever someone worthy of the title takes the mantle, clan and country prosper, but more often than not, the entire edifice drags along with neither guidance nor verve. Nevertheless, since the sine qua non of leaders are not clearly understood or well defined, and being helmless and lacking political continuity is worst of all possible worlds, the current system is better than nothing. And while it is far from ideal, it has the advantage of one important virtue in particular. It is practical. On the other side of the equation, we have the example set by the hidden villages where leaders are elected. Some would argue that this system is better than hereditary succession, but I have my doubts. The Kage election process is in essence a popularity and patronage contest. It is only workable because the shinobi are an unified community that considers non-shinobi as outsiders. Imagine getting the majority of various merchant guilds, farmers, samurai clans and other factions to agree on a single candidate at the national level, and the idea soon loses its luster and we begin to understand why nations chose hereditary succession. And even within the confines of the hidden villages, Kage elections are risky endeavors. Konoha seems to have lucked out in this regard with a succession of strong Kages, though the same cannot be said of either Sand or Mist, as the examples of the Yondaime Kazekage and Mizukages and the resultant losses suffered by their villages illustrate. The likely issues are that when electing Kages, their administrative ability is not taken into consideration, and being modeled on the culture on strongmen, there are no checks and balances to ensure that the strongmen aren't utter nuts. In essence, while it appears better on the surface, the system followed by the hidden villages is actually worse because the risk of failure is higher and the results of such failure are much worse. So much for existing succession mechanisms. The need for a better leadership selection process exists because of the immense gap in resultant rewards between a mediocre or average leader and a great one. Exhibit number 1 among the shinobi is Senju Hashirama and the manner he re-engineered society with his idea of hidden villages. This visionary was able to unite clans that were diverse and at odds with each other into a single political entity, and in the doing, he forced the rest of the elemental nations to follow his template. He ended the age of endless warfare between and within shinobi and samurai, and established some semblance of peace. Imagine where we would be if we could only have a succession of leaders of his caliber, which his successor Hokages, no offense intended to their honorable names or the good they did, were not, as demonstrated by the simple fact that they haven't changed the world in a similar manner. My apologies, Godaima-sama. Hatake Kakashi smiled benignly at his cheeky student. There was scattered laughter as the rest of the junta mulled the idea. None taken, Naruto. To be compared with the first is honor enough, and to be judged against his achievements is high honor indeed. But while your vision is grand indeed, you haven't yet addressed Shikaku's question on leadership selection. I'll grant that I think you've successfully argued the need for a better system. There were numerous eyes and nods of assent among the members of the junta, with only a few looking askance at to the wisdom of challenging convention. Clearly, there was more support for Naruto's ideas on leadership selection, since he'd openly declared his support for them and was only discussing who would succeed them. There are many qualities that an ideal leader must have: wisdom, vision, political savvy, charisma, respect, etc. These are all rare qualities, and finding them in combination is rarer still. Even worse, those who are led must believe in their leaders, and that is a whole different kettle of fish. I don't think anyone's ever conducted an exhaustive study of what made historical leaders great, and I'm not sure we can trust such a study because the records are certainly biased and tampered with. However, if we limit ourselves to merely searching for a better than existing leadership selection mechanisms, and the obstacles we face aren't nearly as Herculean. So, what defines our better leader? What are the qualities such a leader must possess? I have a list, though I'm neither sure of its completeness nor its correctness. It is a list, all the same, which I hope you'll all grant, is better than nothing. The qualities are patriotism, altruism, discipline, character, ability to listen, and the willingness to lead. Patriotism is self-explanatory, but the others aren't nearly so. Certainly, my list is notable in that it does not contain many of the innate qualities of the ideal leader I highlighted mere moments before. This is by design. I selected altruism because someone who can only think of themselves and not of everyone has no business on the throne or anywhere near it. The daimyo of wind and the late claimants to the fire throne are excellent examples in this regard. Similarly, someone who favors one group over another within the nation would be a disaster in the long run, as they would create factions that work against each other instead of together for a better future. I chose discipline because so much power is vested in a leader and they must have the self-restraint to not give in to the temptation to misuse it. Consider the examples of the Yondaime Mizukage, who initiated the bloodline purges because the bloodline clans opposed his plans one too many times, or of Orochimaru, who had the confidence of all the senior leaders in this room and misused the power entrusted upon him against innocent and powerless civilians and clan children of Hai no Kuni. I chose character because honesty within members of the group, which everyone in the nation is to a leader, is paramount. How can one be expected to lead when one cannot be trusted by one's subordinates, after all? Character also includes dealing fairly with members of one's own as well as opposing factions within the overall community of citizens. Non-citizens aren't exactly fair game, but leaders don't have a duty and responsibility to be honest with them, and neither does their honor hinge on it. I chose willingness to listen because lacking all the characteristics of the ideal leader, our candidate needs to have advisors who are skilled in those areas where they are lacking. How can someone who is unwilling to listen to others lead everyone when they demonstrate ignorance and a propensity to make enemies by turning a deaf ear to the helpful advice of others? Finally, I chose willingness to lead because if a person is unwilling to take the mantle of leadership, no good will come of fostering it on them. Why not wisdom or education? Nara Shikaku asked to smiles from the gathered members. Those in the know knew that it was a swipe at the Hyuga clan head and part of the informal, undeclared, and continuing war between the two friends. As you'd stated earlier, Narasama, wisdom is only clear in hindsight and can be recognized only after the fact. Formal education is good for maintaining continuity of knowledge, but isn't even necessary for research or engineering. Experience serves just as well in both. I have little formal education in physics, but I was able to develop a practical nuclear weapon by boning up on the theory, and through perseverance and sheer bullheadedness. Orochimaru was certainly more educated and knowledgeable than everyone in this room. It did not stop him from delving the depths of human depravity. Senju Hashirama was an idiot if the classified records are to be believed. Look at what he wrought and what so many more educated and intelligent men than he did. But clearly, a leader needs to be a strategist, Hyuga Hayashi stated, sounding for all the world like he truly believed his statement. He did not. Why, when there are advisors like our Jounin commander who are good at thinking strategically? So long as a leader is willing to listen and has good advisors, it doesn't matter if he is lacking in one area or another, Naruto replied with a knowing smile and wink. The Hyuga clan head was responding to his friend's challenge. The things that men in power did out of ennui. But who selects the advisors? A lot of good it'll do when the advisors are idiots themselves, as is largely the case today when those positions are filled by patronage, Koharu spoke, taking a sideswipe at the Godaime's advisors, her successors. The worthies smiled benignly at the Sandaime's teammate. It was a known fact that Koharu was still angry about the way she and Hamura had been pushed out of their jobs. Select them for merit, Naruto replied deadpan. Hopefully, the meeting wouldn't devolve into political infighting. You said, I quote, those who are led must believe in their leaders, unquote. Where does that enter in your leader selection process? A samurai asked. You've jumped the gun a bit, I think, because we haven't gotten to that part. But I was about to segue to it, so I'll answer your question. The selection process I envision is also an election of sorts, a popularity contest, if you will, among a pool of candidates who have already demonstrated some of the qualities of a leader. Namely, patriotism, altruism and discipline. The candidates must volunteer themselves for the contest, which takes care of willingness to lead. Are you thinking of a test? Inazuka Tsum asked, leaning forward in her seat. I suppose you could call it a test, though it is like no other test you've ever heard of, Naruto spoke, rubbing his chin thoughtfully. What I have in mind is service to the nation. Not short-term service, but long-term, preferably a decade or so of danger, discomfort, low pay, hardship, etc., where volunteers make consistent, long-term sacrifice for the good of society. As in infantry, cavalry, shinobi, a samurai asked. Among others, yes. A doctor who spends a decade or so in a far-off corner of the country helping the needy there for a little stipend and little material comfort would qualify as well. I'm sure you can think of similar cases. Those who have served their term of service honorably and to satisfaction become eligible to volunteer for the contest. And who will vote for them? What's to prevent those with ulterior motives from rigging the election in favor of a particular candidate? If wisdom is clear only after the act, and we're agreed it is, by implication, all ideas are equal until put to the test in the real world, whereupon those that pass are called wise. What's to prevent someone from choosing an altruistic contestant who publicly favors a policy that favors their group and rig the elections to put that person in power? The end result would still be determined by groups that are out to enrich themselves, increase their power base, etc., Hatake Kakashi asked. The junta members nodded their agreement. The road to hell is paved with good intentions, and just because the intent of a leader is good didn't mean that the end result is. First, only those who are qualified, namely, those who have provided service to the nation, will be eligible for vote. Why not those currently serving? A senior samurai lord asked. Because then even those who joined those fields of service for other reasons will gain the ability to vote. Imagine a warrior who became a ninja or a samurai because they loved the thrill of the battle, or because they loved to kill, or because of the chance for loot and rapine. Or imagine a doctor who became one for money. These are precisely the people we don't want to have a say in the selection of next-generation leaders. Hopefully, those who joined for ulterior motives will be pushed out by the rigors of the service, or in the case of ninja, samurai, or other services, die in service. Second, the offices up for election will not be life, though it'll be reasonably long, perhaps a decade. It must certainly be long enough to give the elected representatives time to implement their vision and for the nation to judge the results of their actions. Third, though the elected representatives can enjoy a long term, there should be a mechanism to recall them from their posts if they lose the confidence of the voters. Fourth, the election will be to elect representatives who will in turn elect one of their members as the leader of the nation. Sounds fine in theory, Naruto, Nara Shikaku pointed out, intentionally trying to dirty the waters. If there were opponents to the Uzumaki's plans, he wanted to spot them now so as to create strategies to counter and co-opt them. But we don't have the pool of people who will elect the representatives. In their absence, is your plan practical? We have the gathered members of the junta, Naruto responded with a wide grin. Now, he knew he had them. You'll be kernel around which the new political system grows. Add members to the junta whom you judge have demonstrated those qualities I've described. Release the seals of power to the public. Create programs so that those willing can render service to the nation. When enough time has passed and the pool is long enough, run elections. What does one do when one has achieved one's goals and exceeded life's ambitions? And what ambitions and goals those had been. Saving one's nation by extirpating errant family and clan, protecting family honor by murdering sociopathic, insane, mass-murdering cousin, and saving the shinobi world from a gang of mass-murdering thugs and madmen. And with all that over and done, Itachi was at a loss. He'd never expected to be alive to see the end of Akatsuki. If everything had gone according to his plans, his death would have given his little brother the power to burn down the organization. Itachi had pondered his future for 3 weeks as he walked to the gates of Konoha, but he hadn't been able to come up with a clear, definitive answer. End result, time had run out. He was going to have to improvise for the first time in a very long while. Next, the bored Chunin guard manning the gate called, his eyes buried in his paperwork. Itachi approached the man and his desk. Already, a few folks had given him disbelieving looks and then gotten the hell out of Dodge. Clearly, they expected fireworks in a wee while and did not want to be caught in the crossfire. Name? Uchiha Itachi. And I'm Uchiha Madara, the Chunin retorted hotly, raising his head to glare at the joker who was wasting his time. Look, wise guy. At this point, the Chunin recognized Itachi. Whatever words he was about to utter died on his lips. His complexion turned from ruddy and hairy to wide-eyed surprise and finally, settled on pale and scared shitless with mouth hanging open. Cat got your tongue? Itachi asked. A wicked smile lit his face as he got into the groove and leant over the Chunin. These were the last few minutes of his life and he meant to enjoy himself to the fullest. The Chunin blinked once. Blinked again. Then, shrieking like a little girl who had a big centipede crawling up her leg, he stumbled back so fast his chair fell over and he fell on his ass. This did not stop him from retreating. Somehow in his terror-induced panic, he crawled backwards over the chair on his hands and feet, his eyes never leaving Itachi's. Itachi rolled his eyes. Being a shinobi boogeyman could be so aggravating. It was a good thing for the Chunin that he did not have to be a crazy, kin-murdering, bloodthirsty, megalomaniac psychopath anymore. Because it was usually at this point that he inflicted major bodily harm, caused all sorts of mayhem, and scared the shit out of everyone in sight and beyond. Honestly, he mumbled, shaking his head in disgust. He wondered aloud, to the Chunin and the rapid response squad that had deployed to surround him, you go on a few murdering rampages and suddenly you're persona non grata on everyone's social calendar. I mean, what's up with that? No one responded. There was plenty of shuffling and clatter, and a few, oh my gods, and a single very feminine shriek from a well-built civilian guard as every civilian in sight that hadn't wised up to the situation so far, finally did and ran for it. Still, none of the shinobi attacked. If there was one good thing about being a shinobi mad god, it was that the reputation cut down the number of people who were willing to start an armed confrontation with you to the bone. It was practically the only thing about being associated with the Akatsuki that Itachi had enjoyed. Anyways, Itachi continued, turning the visitor's register to face him and reaching for a brush, let me fill this out since you seem to be out of sorts. Name, Uchiha Itachi. Country, fire, back in the day. Currently, nationless. Shinobi, yes. Status, mass-murdering missing nin with a touch of insanity and a hankering for arterial blood, wandering about and indulging in pointless massacres and gratuitous bloodshed. I even have a motto, have kunai, will murder. Sex, not in the last few weeks. About time for my ashes to be hauled. I tell you, the next massacre is going to be interesting for certain. Address, don't have one really. Goes with the whole missing nin gig. Purpose of visit, a tete-a-tete with the Hokage. And perhaps, a private get-together with my brother, followed by an evening of violence, bloodshed and slaughter. And rape. Definitely rape. Sign, yes. Here you go. Seeing that no one had moved and every civilian within a couple of blocks had successfully fled, Itachi pushed the register over to the Chunin with his pointing finger. And because he felt like it, he whistled a children's rhyme. The better to disconcert people with. If you don't mind, he said, turning slightly to sit on the desk, and I know you don't, I'll rest my feet for a few. It's been a long walk from Rain to Konoha, my feet are very sore and I foresee some major physical activity in the evening. The Chunin did not respond. Gripping his kunai tightly with both hands, he struggled vainly and failed mightily to stop the shaking. It was really a sad, sad sight. Itachi shook his head and with a twitch of his finger, ensnarled the Chunin in a genjutsu of his worst nightmares. The Chunin's eyes rolled in his head and he fainted. Frontline material, clearly, the man was not. But you had to make allowances with rear echelon guards and whatnot when there was a major war afoot. The rest of the ANBU Rapid Response Platoon showed up just then and brought multiple squads of reinforcement with them. Konoha's defenders were on the ball, though clearly, there were exceptions like the now unconscious Chunin. No one initiated violence, however. So long as Itachi remained seated, the responders were willing to await further reinforcements. At last, the Hokage and his posse of guards arrived at the scene. Itachi, who'd hoped for a few minutes more to bask in the sights, sounds and smells of his home before he committed suicide by Kage, sighed inwardly and slid his travel bag off his shoulder and got off his perch. He stretched, eyeing his opposition speculatively. This was his final duty to his country and he needed to make it look good, possibly without leaving fatalities, which was going to be extra hard. Afterwards, when the Hokage's personal ANBU examined his belongings, they would find his mission report and the sealed bodies of the various Akatsuki. He expected whomsoever did the examination among the ANBU to have conniptions. Let's get started, shall we? He sneered at his Konoha nin. I haven't much hope, but do try to give me a better challenge than my late family and those useless blowhards at the Akatsuki. ANBU shifted stances and shuffled as they prepared to engage. Stand down, ANBU Captain Uchiha Itachi. Kakashi barked in his command voice, interrupting the fight before it began. Silence. None of the ANBU took their eyes off Itachi. These were all hardened veterans of many battles and they knew how dangerous the oldest surviving Uchiha was, but there was a subtle hesitation in the ranks. The eve of a battle with an strength ninja wasn't the best of places to learn that your commander's lost his wits, after all. I'm your ANBU captain. I'll be sure to feed your entrails to street dogs after I tear off your limbs for thinking that a worthless weakling like you could command me, Itachi replied menacingly, breaking the quiet. Is Kakashi out of his bloody mind? Your mission has ended. In fact, I decree it so right now. I repeat, stand down, Kakashi repeated, stepping forward. Immediately, ANBU moved to interpose themselves between the madman they had sworn to obey, and the madman who had once commanded and then betrayed them and their sacred oath to Kage and country. Itachi did not hesitate. Didn't the Godame understand that he had to die here? He boosted to his best speed, barreled through the defenses of the ANBU directly between him and Kakashi. The lady's arm bent in an unnatural direction and broke with a loud crack. Itachi flung her aside as he would a puppet and beelined for the Hokage with his kunai bared to slash at Kakashi's throat faster than anyone but Ninja Legends could react. Kakashi, the madman, stood like a statue. His posture screamed trust, calm, poise, nonchalance and utter conviction. He might as well have been dictating a letter to his aide. Itachi swerved so that his kunai missed the Hokage's carotid by the barest of whiskers and jumped sideways to escape the ANBU who were desperately trying to cut him down before he assassinated their principal. He had expected Kakashi to defend himself or even flinch, he was a nuke nin, after all, but the Godame had thrown him off kilter. After so long being actively distrusted by all he dealt with, to experience that level of trust. Itachi was filled with pride and love for the Godame. Who wouldn't give their life for a Kage who treated their men so? And while he had done a lot of terrible things in his life, Itachi wasn't going to add the assassination of Kakashi, his Kage, to his list. Not even for duty or clan honor. Stand down, Anbu. Kakashi ordered cool as a cucumber. This time, the Anbu obeyed the Godame's orders as Itachi dropped his kunai and made no move to attack or defend himself. After so many years on the run and so many murders and so much bloodshed, all with no hope for a future, Kakashi's actions were akin to a helping hand to a dying man. Itachi decided he would trust his Kage to do the right thing by him. The Godame stepped in front of Itachi and put his hands on the Uchiha's shoulders. Welcome home, Itachi. Your mission's over. Welcome home, XXXX 2 weeks later. Land of Iron. The meeting of the Kages and the various heads of state was to take place a month in the future. But the actual negotiations were happening now between duly appointed plenipotentiaries of the elemental nations and the shinobi villages. Much progress had been made towards a formal ending of the war, though much still remained to negotiate. The issue of Konoha's monopoly on seals of power, which all hidden villages had assumed would be the main object of contention, had been resolved with ease. Against the implied threat of continuance of war and a multinational alliance Konoha should they refuse to share the secrets, the Leaf Village had been unruffled and unyielding, initially. Then, in a surprise decision, they had changed tack and announced that they would make all their hard-earned knowledge available to the public a week ago. Most surprising of all, they had even shared how they'd created and used the world's first nuclear weapon at Kusa. The decision had flummoxed everyone at the conference. In private, members of the fire delegation had confessed to being caught off guard and had bemoaned the fact that no one knew what had changed the minds of the junta ruling their nation. Still, while it hadn't been the outcome that the informal alliance of villages against Konoha had wanted, it had been enough to prevent a resumption of war on an even wider scale. Wiser and paranoid minds in the villages were already cautioning that it was a subtle ploy by the Leaf Village to undermine the status quo of the elemental nations. Today, however, Konoha had done something so far-fetched that the prospect of war loomed larger than ever. So much so that the Cloud delegation had to raise the subject as soon as the day's private meeting started. These negotiations simply cannot move forward until we have a satisfactory explanation as to why Konoha is suddenly cavorting with the rogue Akatsuki. Especially since the atrocity that organization committed in T was your raison d'etre to destroy Kyusugakure. Masahiro Iwa spoke plainly and calmly, but there was steel aplenty in his voice. He was an old retired shinobi who was at the conference as a representative of the Kyumogakure and the Raikage, and as such, he had the power to make or break it. I assure you Masahiro Dono that the junta aren't working with Akatsuki. They remain a forsworn enemy of my nation. Koharu, Fire's representative at the negotiations, categorically stated his nation's official position on the subject. Masahiro cleared his throat. It wasn't considered polite in the circles he moved to be direct, but he could see that the Fire delegation would ignore the indirect approach. Perhaps it has escaped you, Honorable Koharu, but I can't help but notice that you walked into this room with Uchiha Itachi. I'm talking about the very same Nin who was formerly of your village and currently, a member of the Akatsuki. Uchiha Itachi, the Kinslayer. I truly want to believe you, but your assurance would bear more weight if one of Akatsuki's most feared assassins didn't stand guard over you at this very meeting. Masahiro's guards faced off against Uchiha Itachi in a tense standoff. They hadn't unsheathed weapons, unsheathing weapons at a peace conference being considered oafish behavior and all that, but they were chakra adepts and they were priming their chakra for release. Itachi smiled beatifically and ignored the Cloud Anbu. Without question, the guards were skilled adepts, but there was skilled and there was skilled. Frankly, he could take on the whole Cloud detachment with his hands tied behind his back. Koharu nodded sagely. Ah, I see. I understand why you might be discomfited by Uchiha Itachi's presence. He does have somewhat of a reputation in certain circles. But rest assured that his presence is neither unwarranted or does it indicate that Hai no Kuni are now allied with Akatsuki. Masahiro clasped his hands together and leant forward. Pray explain. Koharu smiled, and seeing that smile, Masahiro tensed. He did not know what was behind that smile, but he was certain neither he nor his country were going to be advantaged by the coming revelation. It is a good thing that you brought up the subject of my guard, Masahiro Dono, because it allows me to make a couple of announcements without seeming to stray from the objectives of these negotiations. So, I thank you. Hai no Kuni has 2 announcements to make today. I suspect that the data we provide will give you much to ponder, and I want to make it clear that we understand if the Kaminari delegation wants to adjourn for the rest of the day to discuss amongst yourselves and formulate a response. The first and perhaps the most critical announcement is that Hai no Kuni have struck a major blow against Akatsuki. As of this morning, there are just 2 ranked members alive in the organization. One of Masahiro's adjutants leaned over to whisper something in his ears. The ambassador nodded and held up a finger. You have questions, Masahiro Dono? Yes. Our intelligence services haven't reported any large-scale battles involving large numbers of ranked nin in the last month anywhere in the elemental nations. Off the top of my head, how many Akatsuki dead are we talking about? Where were they attacked? Who attacked them? Which of your units took part in the action? All good questions. I'll endeavor to answer them, national security and information confidentiality allowing. Hai no Kuni have now accounted for 7 Akatsuki agents in 3 separate actions. 2 were engaged and eliminated while they were operating alongside Rogue Suna and Kyomo Nuke Nin in Kaze no Kuni. 1 more was liquidated during operations on the Hai no Kuni border with Kyuzugakyur. In the last operation, which was conducted within the last 3 weeks in the Land of Rain, we executed another 4, including the 2 leaders of the organization. I note that you haven't answered the last 2 questions. Further, that makes 7. Akatsuki are 10 in number, Masahiro pointed out. Yes, that is correct. And I'll state categorically at the outset that we'll not provide further details on the first 2 actions. But you'll brief us on the mission in Rain? Koharu nodded. As already stated, national security and information confidentiality allowing, we'll share intel. Go on. Akatsuki were headquartered in Rain. In fact, our intel sources confirmed that the organization had deposed of Hanzo years ago and were running the country. That is hard to believe. Koharu cleared her throat. It's quite true, Masahiro Dono. Uchiha Itachi, whom you see behind me, had infiltrated the organization on our orders and struck the decapitating blow in Rain. The same Uchiha Itachi who assassinated his entire clan in a single night? Masahiro's adjutant asked in a disbelieving voice. Rumors of Jounin Itachi's insanity were quite exaggerated, I assure you. Koharu responded. The Uchiha massacre was merely internal squabble, however unfortunate it was, and we used it to our advantage to infiltrate Akatsuki. Masahiro opened his mouth and paused. Had Konoha just confessed to an internal power struggle and wiping out of the Uchiha clan? There had to be a way to exploit that piece of freely given incendiary information, but that could wait for another time. Then retried again. You mean he executed his family on Konoha's orders? That was the story we wanted the world to believe. The truth is, the traitor Orochimaru was responsible for the massacre, Koharu replied with a hint of insincere sadness. His lust for the Uchiha's Sharingan is well documented. He had poisoned the Uchiha well prior to the events of that terrible night with a terrible drug that made everyone who drank of it paranoid, delusional and murderously insane. From what we were able to piece together, he had meant to gather all his victims' eyes in harvest. We cannot prove it, but we suspect that his actions may have been influenced by the leader of the Akatsuki through mind control. Another frightful power of the eyes of Samsara, Masahiro murmured, stroking his chin. He knew for sure that he did not believe Konoha's new official story, and he was certain that his initial surmise about a brutal extermination of a wayward clan was on the mark, but for now, he'd go along with it. How did Itachi end up being scapegoated for the massacre? I would think that producing this evidence to the world would have helped Hai no Kuni in the court of public opinion back then. Yes, quite, Koharu agreed readily. If Masahiro was going to assume that the Rinnegan wielder was the leader of the Akatsuki, she wasn't going to disabuse him of the notion. There would be endless recrimination if it ever got out that the Godaime's genin teammate and one of the Yondaime's praised students had been the real power behind the throne. As to the other assertions, why, it was child's play to handle that line of question. You see, Itachi had to take the fall because we had intelligence that Akatsuki were interested in Jinchuriki and the tailed beasts. And the Sandaime decided that we needed someone, a spy inside the organization, so that we could act at the opportune time. That moment finally came, and we have. But Orochimaru was a member of Akatsuki at that time, as best as our intelligence could figure out. How did Itachi survive initiation if he merely took credit for the Snake Sanin's crimes? Because of the drug, of course. He argued that he felt an insane rage come over him at the thought of his weak clan and went on his rampage to prove the point that they were a bunch of weaklings unworthy of the Uchiha name and pedigree. Masahiro's adjutant leaned forward and murmured something in his ears. Whatever it was, Masahiro perked up. And what of the fate of the eyes and the body of the Akatsuki leader, he asked. Destroyed. It was thought that since the leader had demonstrated the ability to resurrect himself multiple times during the attack on the capital of T, it would be prudent to destroy the body and the eyes in their entirety. Jounin Itachi used special techniques to ensure that the body was consumed completely in fire after incapacitating the leader. We'll have to have our spies independently confirm that, Masahiro thought. The thought of those eyes in the hands of Hai no Kuni already grown so immensely strong. Heaven forbid. And how were he and the other, was it 3 Akatsuki members, incapacitated? Jounin Itachi poisoned the air in the Akatsuki HQ building. The barest hint of a smile hit Masahiro's face. Yes, that would do it, he confirmed. Then, turning to Itachi, and now that your infiltration mission is complete, you've returned to Konoha. Itachi did not reply. As a guard, it was not his job to speak at these meetings without leave. Jounin Itachi, I give you permission to answer this question. Itachi nodded. Yes, Masahiro Dono. And Kyumo can believe as much of it as we like. Koharu smiled. We have said what needs to be said. Remember, Masahiro Dono, you asked us to trust everyone at this table with some of my nation's greatest military secrets, namely, our seals of power. As our late and much beloved Shodaime before us, we have shared those secrets without demanding concessions from this group as a sign of our goodwill. If you would question our trustworthiness at this juncture, after we've performed the second single greatest act of magnanimity in the history of the elemental nations, we would be forced to unilaterally withdraw from this summit and rethink some of our confidence-building initiatives. Especially since none of the other nations have ever come close to demonstrating such altruistic actions through the years. Masahiro nodded. He'd wondered what Hai no Kuni were going to demand in return for sharing the seals of power. Turning a blind eye to Itachi's return to Konoha's ranks was apparently it. It was pricey, in the usual course of things, but worth it because of the seals of power. Very well. Moving on. Well, what do you want me to say, Tsum? Godaime asked pointedly. Itachi is a killer, the Inazuka matriarch snapped back, her pitch rising in frustration at her failure to get through to her audience. He massacred his whole fucking clan, for crying out loud. And here we are, discussing how we're going to integrate him back into the daily life of Konohagakure. What the hell is wrong with you people? Kakashi took a deep breath and pushed back against his seat. He'd known he would have the hardest time getting the clans to accept Itachi back into the shinobi ranks, but the thing had been harder than his worst expectations. He and the clans had been at it the whole morning with plenty of shouting and precisely no progress. Good thing he'd sent Itachi off to the negotiations to end the war, or someone would have gone behind his back and tried to assassinate him. The bloodshed an assassination would have sparked, regardless of whether Itachi committed suicide by shinobi or not, did not bear thinking. Love his darlings much as Kakashi did, there was no predicting what Sasuke and his teammates would have done under the circumstances. Shikamaru stood up. The Godame looked up at him and raised a questioning eyebrow. The Nara heir had been silent so far through the deliberations, letting his dad take point. And Kakashi was almost afraid of what he'd say when he opened his mouth. "If I may have the floor, Godame-sama," he asked with a nod. "The heir to the Nara clan has the floor," Kakashi announced with a polite nod. Shikamaru cleared his throat, straightened his shoulders and faced the gathered clan leaders. "The Nara clan supports the motion to re-enroll Uchiha Itachi into the shinobi rolls." The room erupted into cacophony. "What the hell is wrong with you?" Some screamed into his face, her voice easily overwhelming everyone else's. The Nara waited silently until order was restored. "Let me explain." The Godame welcomed Itachi back to Konoha in the presence of Anbu and God knows however many civilians were around, nestled behind hidey holes and spying on the confrontation. "So what?" snapped Kiba. "This is a shinobi village. There are spies everywhere and apocalyptic rumors are a dime a dozen. The fact that there are witnesses doesn't mean a damn thing. Nevertheless, the rumors have spread among the civilian population like wildfire that our Kage embraced and shranked member of Akatsuki in broad daylight and called him his loyal shinobi. For all intents and purposes, the cat is already out of the bag." The discussions continued on late into the night, but with the Nara camp firmly behind the Hokage, Itachi's rehabilitation was a foregone conclusion. All that was left was the wrangling to soothe the ruffled feathers of opposing clans, which required some costly sacrifices and expenditure of political capital which Kakashi was all too happy to expend. He was under no delusions that Hai no Kuni owed its survival to his children. And if bringing Itachi back into the fold kept them happy, then it was a small price to pay. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. Make sure to like and subscribe, and don't forget to share this video with your friends. Guys, make sure to help the author by visiting the link in the description. This is Fox Sage, and I'm signing off.